This is a bit of a long one, so do get comfy. Now, when I lived in Minnesota, I saw something that's troubled me for years now, and still does. You see, I had about 2 weeks into my plane ride, moving to PNW. I had no money and no one to stay with, so me and my dog roughed it and camped out in the woods. It was middle of November 2022, and temperatures were 22 low and around 35 to 38 high. In other words, always had a fire going. It honestly wasn't that bad, except at night when the fire would go out. My dog would either stay in the tent or tied up next to me. We must have spent only about 6 days in that area, and every single day I saw massive deers. I had just moved from Memphis, where I bagged my first one. The deer in Minnesota were jaw-droppingly huge compared to my 10-pointer. Sometimes they would be about 100 yards away, walking or running across some train tracks. The woods were thick, but I could always make out animals. Before night, I would always see a dog, sometimes even two, looking at me and very slowly approaching. I always screamed and hollered when I noticed them. On the second night that I was there, I heard crashing through the woods, and rocks near the tracks as well. I stepped out of my tent, and I would see about 10 or so deer running down the tracks, and then blindly dart back directly towards me. I figured that I'll see or smell fire too, so I just sort of stood there and was just in awe of nature. But they weren't really veering off. The trees were huge and the woods were thick, and they were running and jumping so fast and far that I would feel the ground shake. The two leading deer, they came within 10 feet of me easily, and honestly, I was petrified. I genuinely thought that I was about to be pierced or something, but as soon as I stepped my leg over to dive into the tent, they turned 90 degrees and just jumped, running away. I thought that it was extremely scary, but also very cool to be honest, and I was glad for the experience. Now, at about 10 p.m., I'm stoking the fire and I noticed something off in the distance on my side of the tracks. Not even towards the tracks, but parallel with me. It looked like two people with headlamps on, processing a deer. On my first day there, I did see and quickly talk to a guy passing by, saying that he was looking for deer skins. I made nothing of it, and stopped shining my light towards them. After failing to fall asleep, I stepped outside and the two headlamps were still on. Same spot and making the same motions. It looked like they were maybe about 5 or maybe 4 feet apart. One would fiddle with something on the ground and hand it over to the other. At this point, I was alarmed because, it's now 1 a.m. I shine my light, watch very intently. It was so dark and so far away that by that time my eyes would focus and I would need to blink, but I would always lose what I was seeing. I would watch one headlamp and see that headlamp split into 2. So I knew that what I was looking at was a pair of eyes now. 2 individual sets of eyes. They were behind fallen logs and a standing tree. The motions that I saw were that of them moving back and forth, peeking around different spots of the trees and log. I moved my head side to side and they did the same, but on different sections and heights of the tree, like they were crouching and then sort of standing, but never looking away from me. When I got back into my tent, I zipped up the door, leaving the top open about an inch or 2. I zoomed my flashlight in, peeking through the hole, and I could see when they stopped and when they started this motion back up. The harder that I tried to focus, the more agitated the movement seemed. I was getting on a plane soon, so all I had were knives and a couple of flares, kept them close and snuggled up with my dog. Around 5 a.m, I peeked through my tent and was still being watched. When the sun came out, I stepped out, and when I did, nothing was there. I figured that they were wolves, but I don't know, the motion and the mimicking of mine was pretty insane. I had a great spot though, and I worked hard on cleaning this area up, so I thought that I'd stay there at least another night, not trying to psych myself out over, well, nothing really. Now, on night 3 I never did see them again, but it was around midnight when I heard crashing through the tracks again, and thought that it was the herd of deer. Following it with my flashlight, I noticed that it was only one animal, moving way faster too. It did the same thing the deer did before, and started running directly towards me. I could hear it leaving the rocks and running through a large patch of tall grass, like really tall, around 4 feet, dead grass, pretty loud. It's still coming towards me, and I'm shining my light in the general area it's about to pop out of, about 40 feet in front of me, I would guess. The instant it came out, it takes like maximum 2 steps and stands right up and stops instantly. But 1 second it's not seen at all, and the next second I'm staring at this thing, and true flight or fight finally kicks in. I immediately knew that there was no outrunning this thing. I knew that it was a full-on predator, and I knew that if I did run, that I would get chased. The eyes were forward-facing, very long, pointy ears, and could go on all 4s or 2. My dog was zipped up in the tent 3 feet from me. I zoomed in with my flashlight, and it helped absolutely nothing. I could see amberish eyeshine and a wet gloss on the nose. Staying perfectly still with my light on it, I slowly but deeply took in a huge breath. About 10 seconds has gone by, maximum, since it stood up, and I screamed as loud as I could, but also as quickly as I could. All I screamed was "hey," and I never sounded like that before. I've never ever screamed like that in my life. Didn't even know that I could sound like that. It wasn't recognizable. At the same time that I screamed, though, I unintentionally blinked. I heard a thud and the dead grass rustle, but not nearly enough for it to actually be gone. I knew that whatever it was definitely within 3 to 5 feet of the grass line. I continued to yell out that I was going to mess it up and I was going to eat it repeatedly. Before my initial scream, I saw this thing about 7 feet at the tips of the ears. The ears were 100% the same shapes as Anubis as well, if you've ever seen that. Stupidly long and pointy, very pointy. Well, after not hearing anything for quite some time, I just decided that I would take my chances and head back into my tent, and I just stayed there all night, awake and trying to figure out what to do. Thankfully, I made it through the night, and the next morning I walked out into town and went to Caribou Coffee for some Wi-Fi. First thing I did when my phone turned on, I needed to charge, was I searched up images of Anubis. And quite honestly, I started crying silently right there in the store, staring at this picture. I contacted my family in PNW to get a new plane ticket for an earlier arrival. My 2 weeks had now turned into 1. Getting back to camp, I started packing everything up to relocate my camping spot. This was a mistake though, because that giant thing that I saw, I totally forgot about the 2 things that I saw on night 2. So I grabbed my things and I walked right past that spot, the trees that I saw them at. I went about half a mile further, into more of the denser part of the woods. Thinner trees, but denser. That night, night 4, was terrifying too. This was the first night that I'd heard yipping from a pack of coyotes. This was about an hour before the sun went down, and it sounded like a person screaming, but it went on for so long and so loudly that I knew that it wasn't a person. They all started at the same time, and it went on for so much longer than I expected. Probably around a minute, I would say. Very far away, but still made me turn my head at first. About an hour after the sun went down, that's when I heard wolves howling. That definitely made me pucker up a little bit. More chills, and I decided to make a large fire, or at least throw some logs on it. Fewer trips outside in the night and all that. When doing this, I see that the two pairs of eyes are back and they're watching me. Again, I kept being loud and screaming that I was going to eat you and all this, along with other things. The next night, though, it only got worse. Every single night after that, too, just got worse and worse. First night at this new location, the two pairs of eyes come back. The second night was 6 pairs, and the next 8. All of them were at a distance, but very, very still. They stood in the exact same spot every night that they returned, with the main 2 mimicking my motions, peeking around trees for a better view, it seemed. I even saw them vigorously bobbing up and down like a monkey would when I unzipped my tent. When it was finally time to leave, I quickly packed up what I could bring and I left everything not allowed on the flight behind in my tent, not even really caring anymore and just happy to get the heck out of there. To this day, I think about those days, almost every day to be honest. I still have no idea what exactly I saw or what to make of it. I was already going through rough times on family tragedies and all that, and I've spoke nothing of this story to anyone. I mean, they wouldn't believe me anyway. They'd just call me crazy. But here I am on the internet, sharing it with all of you guys, hoping to at least get some answers. I've been living next to this giant graveyard for around 2 years now. It hosts around 50,000 graves. It's genuinely beautiful and often a place that I've visited just to walk around. So, I had this awful day at work. This was about 12 years ago now, but I remember it vividly. Horrible day. One of those days where I just didn't want to go straight home and deal with all of the home sort of jobs and socializing, cleaning, dinner, etc. Instead, I planned on driving to a mountaintop lookout where there's a cool ice cream venue, grabbing a cone and watching the world drift by while I just sort of decompressed. But at some point, I took a wrong turn and I ended up in the neighborhood surrounding the cemetery. So I figured, to heck with it. It's quiet and a cemetery walk would be the peace that I needed. It was dusk outside, but plenty light enough that I could clearly see trees, houses, names on the gravestones, and if anyone else was around too. I knew in about 45 minutes to an hour that it would be dark outside, but for now I felt comfortable. I parked my car and walked over to the berm into the graveyard. Now, this graveyard is massive, by the way. Without signs and streets, it would be impossible to find your way through this maze, and there was no way in heck that I was planning on walking that far in. I just kept to the sidewalk where the berm and the houses were, while the massive graves were on the left of me. I called my then boyfriend, crying to him about how awful my day had been, and he was trying to calm me down and talk me through my day. In my peripheral to the left of me, I thought that I saw a big black shadow at some stage, maybe 50 meters in. It was only brief that I saw it, or I think that I saw it. I wasn't sure if I saw what I even saw, and had I left just then, I probably would have shrugged it off, but my fight or flight instincts definitely had kicked in. I was still on my phone, but became extremely wary of what it was that I think that I saw, if I saw anything at all. So, I'm walking and looking in that direction while I'm still on the phone. My eyes peeled just in case something happened, but I definitely began to start feeling uneasy, and I'm now absolutely focused on anything that might be there with me. I'm a woman walking alone in a graveyard, after all. I'm more concerned with a creepy guy skulking around than I am anything paranormal, but I still feel very uncomfortable and on edge. Anyway, as I'm walking and talking, but still looking in that direction that I first spotted the shadow, it appeared again. But this time, I'm staring right at it, literally watching it manifest, as if it collected this energy or particles and formed a giant black mass, just opaque enough for me to see the gravestones it moved through, but much, much darker than the surrounding area. It was quite tall, much taller than the average human with no arms or legs. Just a moving black mass is the best way that I can describe it. It drifted through several gravestones for about 4 seconds, which is long enough for me to question whether or not I'm seeing things and then confirming, no, I am definitely looking straight at this thing and that it is not a person. It was maybe a little bit closer than when I saw it the first time, but not by much. Maybe 40 meters now. 4 seconds is really a long time to see something and watch it move like this, but I just stared at it, and I think that I stopped talking on the phone completely at some stage. I don't remember what I thought at the time other than the confirmation to myself that what I'm seeing is real. Then, as quick as it appeared, it just vanished, like a fog dissipating again. Instantly, I got this image in my head that the next time that I saw it, it would be right in my face. So I quickly told my boyfriend that I would see him at home, turned and hurriedly walked to the car and left. And quite honestly, I just feel like maybe something was looking out for me and sending me a warning that whatever that thing was, it did not have good intentions and I needed to leave. I don't remember being very scared while I was driving. I don't feel like anything followed me or was in the car with me or anything, but it definitely snapped me out of whatever mood that I was in that day. When I got home, I told my boyfriend what happened immediately and, well, he just shrugged it off, saying that it must have been me hallucinating since I was super emotional. I was really irritated at that response. I mean, I know what I saw, and I am usually a really calm, rational person, so there's no way that I just got so carried away with my emotions that I started seeing things. That felt so unreasonable of a response to me and so invalidating. I lived with my uncle at the time and told him what had happened and how I was really disappointed with my boyfriend's response. That's when he suggested that maybe I saw something because I was emotional and vulnerable. Maybe my walls were down and it was drawn to me. And the more that I think about that incident, the more that just feels right. I think that whatever it was, it seemed curious about me. Maybe I did have some walls down. I don't know, but I don't think that whatever it was had good intentions. I'm just glad to not have any lingering experiences with whatever that was. It's been so many years and I remember it so vividly, and I'm always racking my brain wondering what the heck that thing was. I've even considered talking with psychics about it just to hear what their opinions are, but anyway, I'm just curious about your guys' thoughts and I wanted to share my experience. A few years back, I lived in Berkshire County, Massachusetts, named for the Berkshire Mountain Range. The Berkshires are actually a sub-range of the northern Appalachian Mountains, and I assume if you spend any time in paranormal spaces like here, then you know that weird stuff happens in the Appalachians. I guess that I'd figured since I was so far north that I was safe from the usual appy haunts, safe to whistle at night or walk the woods alone and all that, or to not close my curtains after dark at the very least. I really think now that I was wrong. Now, it was either late summer or early fall of 2020, and my fiancé and I were leaving the tiny suburb where we lived to go to a nearby bigger city for cheaper groceries. In order to get there, we had a 20 to 30 minute drive, the first leg of which was through a heavily wooded hilly area. It must have been around, 6 or 7 during the evening, still bright out and well lit, though visibility was poor because everything is lush green bushes and trees there. But we were driving up a hill road with a couple of houses, both sides of the street, full to bursting with plant life. The green was super dense and impossible to see into. It was warm, so we were driving with the windows down, and as we got to the top of the hill, we heard what I can only describe as a strange noise. My partner and I both grew up surrounded by woods and wildlife, so We know deer when we hear them. Some people who are unfamiliar with deer might think that they're serene and totally silent, but when deer want to be loud, they can make some really haunting sounds, especially if it's a male calling long distance. It's a long, booming sort of honk, like a war horn almost. Think in the family of a bagpipe, but with the edge that clearly marks it as an animal instead of mechanical. Anyway, we recognized it as a deer, but it sounded wounded. The honk was sort of distressed and wobbled at the end, like the deer was losing strength. Unfortunately, people speed in the area, and it wasn't unbelievable that some idiot had hit a deer and drove off without calling animal control or helping in any way. We couldn't see any skid marks, blood, or a body on the road. So I asked my fiancée to pull over into someone's driveway so that I could check the dense foliage on the sides of the road. Deer like to hide themselves and hide their babies, and I, a bleeding heart animal lover, and also an idiot I know, was on the verge of panicking about how we were going to help this injured baby deer. I mean, I was already making plans to visit the veterinarian hospital in the area, one that kept late night hours as I began pushing aside bushes and looking around. I've never interacted up close with a deer, so I was making sort of soft little come here kitty sounds, cats being my only reference at the time. Silly, I know, but I searched the bushes on the side of the street with the houses, which was slightly less dense because of the driveways, but in the end I found nothing. I checked both ways and crossed to the heavier wooded side and began looking there as well. Now, I don't have the best eyesight to begin with, so sorting through the green was difficult, and it took me some time as well. My fiancé was busy speaking with the homeowner of the driveway that we parked in. He had come out to see if we had had an accident or a flat tire and if we were okay. Luckily, I heard a rustle. My heart dropped though as I realized that it was right against the edge of the road, in the very first row of bushes. Definitely not an ideal hiding spot for a deer, which meant that the poor creature might have been in worse condition than I thought it could have been, dragging itself deeper into the foliage if it wasn't. I moved downhill towards the sound, placing myself right at the crux of the road's turn, a blind corner. The rest, well, it just happened so fast, but for me it was like slow motion. So I bent down to move some branches aside where I thought the rustling had come from, hoping that the animal wouldn't run or try to jump at my face. I was so entranced with finding it, with helping. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I had left a hurt animal behind. I finally cleared the bottom of the bush, seeing the ground with its leaf litter. Baby deer camouflaged nicely into the fallen leaves and the dirt, so I stared into the space hard, but there was nothing there. No shapes, no eyes, no movement, just dirt. Still, I felt compelled to stay there, in that position, back to the road. It felt like if I just looked long enough that the deer might appear in front of me. But what actually appeared directly behind me was a speeding minivan taking the turn way too quickly. There are no sidewalks on this street, and no guardrails either. There was just the blind turn, a bad driver who couldn't calculate right, and me at the edge of the road, not looking. I heard the van, and that alone forced me to rip my eyes away from the bushes. I threw myself out of the way of the van and into the leaves, tripping backwards until my back hit a tree that steadied me. I had been only a moment and a few inches away from being absolutely slammed. The van, it didn't even stop too, didn't even seem to acknowledge that they'd almost flattened a person. My fiancé called for me. The search for the deer, which we hadn't heard call again since we first pulled over, was too dangerous to continue. I looked both ways about 1,000 times, panicking, and jittered my way over to the safer side of the street and the driveway that we were in. We got back into our car, listened a moment more, and then we left on our grocery run. My fiancé could tell that something had happened. and I believe that they had suspicions that something other than just the cars spooked me. I didn't want to talk about it though. We were still driving through the woods after all, and we'd have to drive back this way as well. I kept it to myself, the pull that I had felt, the hypnotic way that I had spent hours looking into that hollow in the bushes, the way that I had felt so sure that I would find that injured baby that I was looking for if I just stayed right there in that spot. The way that I was sure now, as we pulled away, that there wasn't and had never been an injured deer there at all. But something called me to that spot, and I ignored all the Appalachian advice that I had ever heard. I answered, and I almost ended up a smear on the pavement for it. I don't know why whatever was there wanted to cause someone's death. I don't know why I was able to avoid it succeeding. I don't know a lot of things about the motivations of the old things that live in the Berkshires, what they are, why they do, and what they do, if they hate us or if they're just hungry. What I do know is they exist, and that they're dangerous. Every bit as dangerous as their southern cousins. The northern Appalachians may not be as popular of a topic, but they are no less old, wild, or vicious than the southern counterpart. I can testify to that now. I guess I'm just sharing this because I want people to know that, to remember that even. These mountains are older than bone, older than the rings on Saturn, and things just as old exist there. If we lose sight of that, if we think some miles of distance and a different state boundary protect us, we are walking into a trap with our eyes wide open. Be careful out there. Be careful in the Appalachians, wherever you may find yourself on them. And if you hear something call to you, well, no, you didn't. This happened around 2010 when I was a kid living in northern Florida. I'm 24 now, so it's definitely been a minute, but after hearing a bunch of your creepy stories, I figured that I'd finally share one of mine. So, I grew up in a super haunted apartment, and this is one of the freakiest things that happened to me there. I lived with my dad and sister in a small apartment. By the time that this happened, we'd been there almost 3 years. Paranormal stuff had already been going on, like footsteps, knocking, or hearing people talking when nobody was home. Nothing too wild, but just the kind of stuff that you could brush off and blame on upstairs neighbors. One thing, though, is that I hated sleeping alone, and I was terrified of the dark there, so I would usually stay up playing my DS under the covers. That night, I was doing exactly that, until my dad came in, took my DS and moved the nightlight from the hallway into my room to try to get me to sleep. It was one of those sort of projector nightlight things that lights up the ceiling with stars and planets and all that. So I was just sort of sitting in bed, staring up at the solar system, still wide awake and wired. Then the whole room suddenly just went pitch black for a split second, almost like somebody put their hand over the light. Right after that, too, I saw what looked like the shadow of a man's hand slowly pull away from the projector, like I could actually see fingers moving and curling back in a fist before pulling its wrist back. Then the ceiling lit up again like nothing happened. I just sat there frozen, like, did that really just happen? And then, a minute or two after, I saw a black shadow mass dart across the ceiling, blocking the light again for a split second before the room was illuminated again. Well, that was enough for me. I threw the blanket over my head, pressed myself against the headboard, and tried not to move. A few minutes passed, and then I heard and felt 2 loud bangs on the right wall next to my head, like someone full-on punched it, hard. The whole wall and the headboard shook, in fact. I didn't even think. I just ran down the hall to my sister's room, dove under her blanket, and stayed there until morning. The next day I went back to my room and I saw that a fairly large painting that I had hanging right above my headboard was halfway off the wall now, which means that whatever hit that wall, it hit hard enough to nearly tear the nails holding it up on the wall completely out. Well, I literally slept with my sister for 2 weeks after that, and have slept with a lamp on until my adulthood after this. That was just one of many paranormal things that happened to me growing up in Florida, but I think this one stuck with me the most because the activity in that apartment got worse up until in my teens after this had happened. So yeah, don't move to Florida, I guess, is the moral of the story. I think the swamp holds stuff in it, and every time that our landlord paints over dust in an apartment, that it just becomes cursed or something. There's something wrong about that place, and it's hard to put my finger on it. Back in 1985, I was in the middle of a very nasty divorce from my first wife. Things had gone horribly sideways, and even spilled over into my job. Sparing all of the nasty details here, suffice it to say that I had a breakdown of epic proportions. For weeks I couldn't function. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and when I did sleep, I was plagued with nightmares. And so, early one day, I grabbed a few things and I just began to drive. I had little money and was in a very dark place mentally. Although I had been raised Christian and grew up in a church, I was very far away from God and was living a very non-Christian life. As I drove, I was in a cloud. I could only see darkness, pain, and despair in my future. I can imagine no happiness, no joy, and no future. Again, suffice it to say, I considered my life over at that age of 22. I drove north from Texas and eventually I found myself in Oklahoma City. There I turned eastward towards my childhood home of Tennessee. As I drove, my despair clouded my perception and I became more and more depressed. I really felt like I was driving myself straight into the gates of the abyss. Somewhere in eastern Oklahoma, I pulled in for fuel though in a restroom break. As I resumed my journey, I noticed a man standing at the side of the interstate on a ramp looking for a ride. He was dressed rather peculiarly for the weather at the time, wearing a long old West-style rain slicker and ivy cap, sometimes known as a flat cap or a duckbill cap as well. One reason that I noticed him was because, in my mind, his appearance bore a striking resemblance to the gyro captain from The Road Warrior with Mel Gibson that had come out a few years earlier. I didn't stop, but I continued on my journey and thought nothing more of it. Soon I was forced to stop again as I suddenly needed to use the restroom very badly, which was unusual for me as I could and still do often drive for hundreds of miles without stopping. In any case, I completed my bathroom break and turned back towards the Interstate 40. As I turned onto the ramp, my eyes were drawn to another hitchhiker looking for a ride, only it was not another hitchhiker. It was the very same person that I had seen a short time earlier at my previous stop. I'm quite sure that I did a double take on seeing him because I was so shocked by it. For reasons that I didn't understand at the time, but have become clearer later in my life, I pulled over and I offered him a ride. He got in the car and thanked me for the lift. In short time, he began to make what I first assumed was small talk. It was far from small talk, though. It was as though he could read my mind. He talked about life's heartaches and troubles, and it soon became clear that he appeared to know more about me and my troubles than he should. He turned the subject to God and his many blessings, and now, nearly 40 years later, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he seemed to have just the right words that I needed to hear at the time. It was, for lack of a better word, miraculous, the way that he seemed to be able to speak to my soul and lift the burdens that I felt that were crushing my very spirit. He rode with me for the rest of the afternoon, and by the time that we were approaching Little Rock, Arkansas, I felt like a new person. He promised me that everything would work out. He said that I was just beginning on a new journey, and he assured me that there were good things in store for me in the future. It was late in the day as we entered Little Rock, and I decided to get a motel for the night. I stopped at a convenience store to let him out of the car so that he could continue on his way. Before exiting the car, he asked if I could spare a little money for food. I told him that I never give money to strangers because I couldn't know if it was just going to be wasted on alcohol or drugs, but that I would, however, be happy to buy him some food. He graciously accepted my offer, and I turned into the parking lot and went into the store. All these years later, I can still remember exactly what I bought for him that evening. I purchased a pack of Bologna, a half a gallon of milk, and a loaf of bread. I also believe I picked up some condiments as well as a candy bar for dessert. After paying for the items, I exited the store and found him waiting at my car. I handed him the bag of food and thanked him for making me feel better. He in turn thanked me for the ride and the food. I got in the car and started it. Placing the car in reverse, I looked around to be sure that I wouldn't hit him backing out, but I couldn't see him anywhere. Now, because it had only been a moment since he walked toward the rear of my car, I was concerned that possibly he may have tripped and fallen behind me or something. I mean, I didn't want to back over him, so I placed the car in park and I got out to make sure that he was clear. But he was nowhere to be seen. I walked around the car and then I walked around the only other car in the parking lot and nothing. I went into the store and asked the cashier if he had seen where the gentleman in the long coat had gone, and he said that he had not seen anyone in the last few minutes but me. I was confused as the cashier should have had a clear view of the parking lot from the checkout counter. I walked back outside and walked out into the street corner and looked all four ways, and there was no one to be seen. I walked around and looked behind the building and nothing. I even got down on my knees and looked under my car as well as the other car in the parking lot, but nothing. The man had disappeared as though he was a ghost. There is no way, even if he had run, could he have gotten out of sight as fast as he did. I mean, the man, the bag of food, and the jug of milk that I had given him were gone, vanished without a trace as though they never even existed. Finally, I gave up and I went a short ways down the road and rented a motel for the night. I went in, took a shower, said a short prayer, and then for the first time in weeks, I slept like a baby all night, peaceful and dreamless. Now, the next morning, I awoke feeling refreshed and reinvigorated. The mental clouds were now gone, the burden was lifted, and I felt like a completely new man. I continued my journey eastward with a new zest for life. Eventually, I traveled to Michigan and then to Florida, where I met a woman slightly older than myself. After the divorce from my first wife was final, we were married and we were together for 34 years until she finally passed. Which means that man was right. Everything did work out. My wife and I had a really good life, in fact. There were difficulties, and at times the road was sometimes rocky, but the good far outweighed the bad. And now I am convinced that that man that rode with me all those years ago, that he was an angel or something like that. Often I have looked back on that dark day and wondered where I would be today if it were not for that man's intervention. Seeing what I was going through and, well, where I was heading, I fully believe that I would have been in prison or even dead had he not been standing on the side of the road that day. It really humbles me and makes me wonder what God saw in me that he would send me an angel like that. Since that day, I have often thought about Hebrews 13:2. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without even knowing it. I know many will not believe me. I get it. My story, or my conclusion even. and that really is your prerogative and totally fine. However, I will always thank God for the angel that was sent my way that day, back in 1985, because without him, I shudder to think where I might be. The other night, around midnight, my mother-in-law, who lives on the opposite end of an adjoined 1-acre plot of land as my wife and I, called my wife telling her that she was hearing a loud wailing sound out back of their house past the tree line. We live in the mountains at the base of a forest. My wife got my attention and told me to come to the window, where we listened for about 10 minutes. And there was a very loud feminine wailing coming from the woods. It was something like the sound of a fox or a coyote makes, but each wail was much longer, louder, and way more human. I have since looked up every wild animal in my area, and have yet to match the sound that I heard to one of them. Right around the time that I thought to record the sound, though, it stopped. I've listened to the recording a few times to see if maybe I could get a glimpse of the sounds that it was making, but I don't think that I caught it. In the recording, though, my mother-in-law talks about how when she first heard the sound, she turned the back porch on and walked outside. She has 2 German shepherds, and they will bark at just about anything, and they spend the majority of their time outside laying in the yard anyway. But weirdly, neither of them made a sound, or did either of them want to go outside with her that day. She said that she went outside and clapped her hands to try and scare whatever it was away. After a little bit, she saw what she said was a small grey cat, looking to be about domestic size. It walked up to the far side of the creek that separates the backyard from the woods, but it didn't move any closer and then proceeded to go back up the hill into the woods. She said that it felt like it was trying to lead her somewhere. She, being an animal lover like my wife, said that she was worried that there was an animal trapped or hurt, and, like some video from the dodo, she was going to go into the woods and find some helpless animal to nurse back to health. Being of sound mind, though, she called us to tell us this and say that she was afraid to go out there by herself, and asked if I would be willing to bring a gun to protect us, in case there was a coyote or something else once we got up there. At the sound of gun and woods and afraid, I was all ears, so I grabbed my plate carrier, a couple of knives, my pistol, shotgun, my Milwaukee chest-mounted bar light, and a small hand torch. My mother-in-law met my wife and I in our backyard, and I told them to drive up the side of the road and see if they could position the car to shine a light into the woods. I said that I would walk across to the back of their property and go into the woods from there so as to not wake up my father-in-law or alert the dogs or anything. I made my way over and approached the woods from the right side of the property. Just so you understand, the left side of the property is flanked by a long fence that stretches about 2 acres in length. It goes back deep into the woods, separating our property from our neighbors. And on the right side of the property, it's flanked by a small road that leads to a few more houses set far back behind ours. I walked over a small bridge that covers the stream separating the backyard from the woods, and walked diagonally toward the fence line. Now, as soon as I stepped foot into the woods, I spotted something reflective just in front of the fence. I had yet to pull out any lights, so I turned on my hand torch and aimed it at the reflection. I walked a bit closer, and the light didn't move, so I imagined that it was just a bit of the fence catching the light or something. Once I was about maybe 20 paces away from it, I saw that there was a small grey blob, roughly ovular shape and covered in fur. My first and only thought was raccoon, because in that split second it added up, but I then panned my flashlight to the right about 10 feet away, and it landed squarely on a set of eyes. What I had seen before just had been this raccoon, but what I saw after, that was something else completely. This thing was a little bigger than a coyote. It had grey fur, and honestly I cannot recall if it had a tail or ears or anything else, but it was both canine and feline in characteristics. leaning more toward canine in appearance. It stared into the light at me for a few moments, and then started walking slowly deeper into the woods. Now, as far as I know, coyotes and foxes alike would be out of there as soon as they even smelt me or hear me take one step into the woods. Stranger still, this thing was not 10 feet away from this raccoon, and they seemed to be perfectly content. I swapped the light back to the raccoon as it moved behind a large pile of rocks towards the fence. I thought that it must have been a burrow or something, so I panned back toward the creature, and it had now moved really far away, deeper into the woods. I cannot recall actually seeing it move or anything though, and it was just there and then it was miles away. I cannot recall seeing its rear end as well. I just sort of looked up into the woods towards a crest at the top of the hill and saw its eyes again staring at me. I'm not one to just waltz through the woods in the middle of the night. In fact, if I was asked to go into the woods at night, armed the way that I was, I probably would have been freaked out, even if there wasn't anything out there. But strangely, I was completely calm. As soon as I met its gaze, I turned on my chest-mounted floodlight and started making my way towards it. I walked probably about 100 feet deeper into the woods. It still hadn't moved. I kept walking until I saw my neighbor's house. The stretch of woods between their house and the fence narrowed out between the two where a hill sat. The creature, it had been at the top of the hill just barely over the crest when I hear a crunching far off behind me at the base of the woods. It was my wife and mother-in-law. I looked back and saw their flashlights, and when I turned back to look for the eyes again, they had disappeared beyond the crest of the hill. I kept walking until I had a realization that I must have been past our property line at this stage. I pulled out my phone and called my wife and asked her where it ended. She told me that there's a line of small red flags where they had installed out electric fence last summer or something. I looked all around and I couldn't see any. Keeping my eyes toward the hill, I started walking backwards toward our property. I had walked back about 100 feet before I saw the line of small flags. Once there, I turned and made my way back down the hill, and I met them at the base of the woods and showed them where I had seen the two animals. We made our way back down the yard and just barely made it back to the porch when another wail was let out. This time, it was different. It was similar, but it was a deeper pitch, and it came from the direction of the creature that I had followed. From the moment that I pressed record to the moment that I left those woods, not a single sound was made. I was completely silent. The whole time I felt no fear, just an urge to follow it. It was just pure curiosity, I guess, but now when I think back on it, the whole situation makes me really nauseous. Listening to the recording from the other night makes me nauseous too, and I'm really not sure what to think of it. And so, maybe someone here can shed some light. My experience began 2 years ago, during a visit to my hometown in Bangladesh. It was certainly not the first time that I had encountered something strange there. Back in 2008, I had heard footsteps echoing outside the house at night, yet when I had looked, there had been no one there. But that was nothing compared to what I would face this time. The nights in Bangladesh are heavy with heat, thick and suffocating. To survive the stifling air, we leave the doors and the windows open, praying for even the faintest breeze. Iron barriers protect the openings, so even with everything wide open, no one can just slip inside or anything. I've always been a light sleeper, and that night I shared a bed with my little niece while my mother and aunt slept on the floor nearby. It was deep into the night, a black and airless hour. The phone was dead and there was no clock in the room. But I awoke to the faint clattering sound of a can skittering across the ground outside. I froze, my senses sharpening. I waited, heart pounding until the sound stopped. Relieved, I let my body sink back into sleep. Just as sleep began to claim me again, a sound floated through the darkness, the soft, eerie laughter of a woman. It was faint, almost blending into the stillness. At first, I brushed it off. Perhaps it was just one of the mad women who lived down the street. I mean, it happened sometimes. I tried to ignore it, willing myself back to sleep. But then, suddenly, the laughter stopped. A heartbeat later, a scream shattered through the night, so sharp and close that it sounded as if it had been unleashed right outside of our barrier. I shot upright in bed, my blood running cold. I squinted into the darkness beyond the door and the window, but the world outside was an impenetrable black void. The screaming ceased, and the laughter returned. Only now it was no longer distant. It was just outside, right there, laughing as if it already knew that we were listening. But it made no sense. Our driveway is long, winding from the road to the house. Even sprinting, it would have taken someone minutes to reach the gate. And yet, somehow, she was there already, laughing and waiting. I sat frozen in terror, terrified that my niece might wake and see whatever horror was lurking out there. Moving carefully, I slid out of bed and shook my mother awake. She opened her eyes, and I could see immediately that she had heard it too. Together, we roused my aunt, a woman whose fearlessness was legendary in our family. Without a moment's hesitation, my aunt seized a torch and moved to the barrier. She shone the light into the night, sweeping it across the yard. The laughter stopped at once. There was no one there. No figure darting away, no rustle of retreating footsteps, nothing. Refusing to be intimidated, my aunt flung open the front gate and stepped out into the suffocating darkness. Mum and I watched through the barrier, hardly daring to breathe. Minutes dragged past, then my aunt's voice rang out, sharp and fearless. "Who's there? Come out before I come for you." She called again and again into the emptiness of the night, but there was no response. She searched everywhere. There were only two ways in or out, both wide and clear. If anyone had been there, they could not have escaped unnoticed. That much was for certain. Still, though, she found nothing. She locked the gate behind her and returned to us. And just as she reached the door, the laughter exploded again, louder, crueler, and right outside once again. We stared at one another in shock, hearts thundering in our chests. It was impossible. My aunt had just searched every corner of the yard. No one had entered, no one had left, and yet the sound was closer than ever. Panic finally seized us. We rushed to wake my brothers and uncles, hammering on their doors. They stumbled out, grabbing torches and sticks, and surged into the night. They unlocked the gate, ready to confront whatever it was. The moment that the gate opened, the laughter stopped. The night seemed to press in on us, thick and unbreathable. They scoured that yard, the porch, the rooftop, searching every shadow, but there was nothing. No footprints, no movement, no sign that anyone had been there at all. Eventually, they returned, telling us to go back to sleep. They offered hollow reassurances about coyotes or wind tricks, but their faces were pale and drawn. I could see the truth in their eyes. They were as shaken as we were. The next morning, no one spoke of it. In fact, they acted as if nothing had happened. But the silence between them said otherwise. I spoke in hushed voices with my cousins, desperate for answers, and they told me about the Farotni, a spirit feared across Bangladesh, a ghostly woman dressed in white, her hair black and tangled, who wanders through the night, laughing and shrieking. She apparently hunts the living, throwing some sort of filth at them if they're unlucky enough to cross her path. She lives to terrify, to haunt. Whether it was truly her that night, I do not know, but All I know is that something was there, and whatever it was, I am confident that it was not human. And I pray that when I return to Bangladesh that it does not find me again. Honestly, I feel ridiculous about this story, but something came up that makes me want to share it, and so here I am. Over a week ago, I was coming home late from a friend's house and was fairly tired by the time that I pulled into the road to my house. As I got close to my house, my attention was fixed in the front of my house, and I have this small front porch with a light that turns on at 7 o'clock automatically, and there's a small table that I decorate up for the holidays, and a small plastic chair in the corner. And as I was pulling up to the house, it looked like a man was sitting in that chair. I was around 35 yards away from the house at this point, but what I could make out was a thin man with pale hair sitting down facing the road. At first, I thought it was my dad, because he has dementia and it can be difficult to get to the porch safely in some areas due to soft dirt and all that. But as I got closer, it looked like the man was younger and had darker hair. I was already trying to figure out what I was going to do about some stranger on my front porch, but as I turned my vehicle into my drive, the car lights washed over the porch and suddenly the chair was empty. The only thing that I could think to do was sit there for a moment to try and understand what had happened. A part of me wanted to believe pareidolia and exhaustion hit to create what I saw, so I was shaky as I gathered my stuff up and ran inside, effectively smacking my foot against a wooden post that makes up my front porch cover and possibly breaking my toe, but that's another story. And I was telling myself that my brain made it up. But the next day I was telling my mother about what happened. I live on my parents' property, so my mother can see my porch pretty easily. And she admitted that she had seen shadowy figures standing on my porch and had thought that a man was sitting on my porch a few weeks before this. And not only that, but she heard a man's voice at my door one evening when I was out. I'm single though, and so she thought that maybe it was one of my brothers or guy friends. She said though that nobody was there, and she heard him talking when she had barely taken a few steps inside of my home. I didn't know what to make of any of that, but last night I saw the man again. I had moved the chair out of the corner, still thinking that I had seen things, and my mind was on spring rolls and some TV when I got home late last night from work, so when I pulled up to my driveway and I saw the man sitting there, I made sure to turn my lights off before pulling in this time. And this time, I know that I saw him. A thin man with a thin face, grayish-brown hair, and wearing a burgundy shirt. He was sitting there again, staring at the road. I sat in my car staring at him for almost a minute, and then turned my lights on and, like before, he disappeared. But this time, I could see him disappear. There was nothing behind him that could have caused any of this because my house has an off-white paneling. So now I have no choice but to believe my mother's encounters, which is troubling to say the least. I already know that my house is haunted, but I've never seen a male spirit before now, and it certainly makes me a little bit uneasy. After I went to college, my little brother still lived at my mum's house. Late at night, when she was asleep, he would sneak out into the driveway to smoke a cigarette. He did this a lot, and one night he was out a little later than normal, around 3 a.m. Now, right across from my mum's house lived an older couple who traveled a lot, and on this night they weren't home. They had a big backyard with a lot of mature trees, shrubbery, and outbuildings like a chicken coop and a couple of old sheds. And as my brother was sitting out there, he heard a scream come from their backyard area. It sounded like a man yelling like "ah" as if in pain, very guttural and primal but muffled and distant. My brother was petrified. The screaming continued for a few moments and then stopped. He said that he had this horrible feeling, though, like he was terrified of it, instead of worried for whoever it was. So he went back inside and tried to forget about it. Well, a couple of weeks later, he was back out again at around 3 in the morning, and at the exact same time as before, he heard the screams again. It sounded the exact same as before, and again he was absolutely terrified. Several weeks later, the woman who lived in that house was taking a walk while my brother was outside. She stopped to say hi, and my brother decided to tell her about the screaming. She chuckled and said yes. When they moved into that house years ago, apparently the children who had lived there before them, they had told them that the backyard shed was allegedly haunted. And that is pretty creepy. This is the closest that I've gotten to having my own ghost story, and, well, I figured that I'd share it. I honestly don't even know why I'm sharing this. It's not like anyone's going to believe me anyway. Maybe it's just to get it out of my head. Maybe it's some kind of warning. I really don't know. Last October, I went hiking alone near Mount Hood. I was trying to get away from everything. Work, noise, people. I found this spot in an old Forest Service map called Owl Hollow near Jordan Creek. And honestly, it sounded perfect. Secluded, quiet, barely even mentioned online. Well, the first few hours were fine, peaceful even, just the sound of the creek and my boots crunching gravel. It felt good, like I could breathe again. But sometime in the afternoon, that feeling started creeping in. You know the one, right? Like somebody's watching you? At first, I tried to shake it off, told myself I was being stupid. Big woods, alone, so of course you're going to feel a bit jumpy. But it kept getting worse. Around 3 p.m., I looked off of the trail and into the trees, and there were a pair of eyes staring at me through the brush, not blinking, just watching me. It wasn't a deer. I mean, I know what deer look like. This was different, lower to the ground, wrong shape, no sound at all. I kept hiking, probably faster than I should have, but I was a bit spooked. About an hour later, I came around a bend, and there they were, a man and a woman standing in the middle of the trail. Now, I don't know how to explain it. Everything about them just felt off immediately, though. Their clothes were weird, like they'd walked out of an old photograph. Faded colors, stiff fabric, almost dusty looking. I tried to say hello, maybe ask if they needed help, but my voice just kind of died. They didn't say anything either, just stared at me. And when they passed me, they both turned their heads at the same time and smiled. I cannot even describe it right, but it just wasn't human. Their mouths stretched way too wide, and their teeth were wrong, a bit sharp almost and dirty, and their eyes, they just turned black. Not like dark irises black, but like bottomless pit black. I almost threw up then and there, and I almost ran, but they just kept walking like nothing had even happened, disappearing into the woods behind me. I should have left right then, I know. I should have turned around, sprinted back to my truck, never looked back, but I didn't. I kept going like an idiot. Another time that I set up camp that night, my hands were shaking so bad that I could barely get the tent up. It didn't matter though, I mean, I wasn't going to sleep anyway. As the sun went down, the woods around me got wrong, too quiet. No birds, no bugs, nothing but the creak and the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. Then, that was when I started seeing them. First one, then two, and then more. 17 or perhaps 18 of them maybe, crouched in the trees, peeking from behind rocks, half buried in the tall grass. All with the same twisted smiles, all with those black, dark eyes. I sat there by the fire, clutching my pistol, feeling like I was going to pass out from the terror. They didn't move. They didn't get closer. They just seemed to watch me. I don't know what snapped, but I stood up and I fired 2 shots straight into the air. The sound echoed through the trees, sharp and painful. They didn't even flinch, though. That was when I ran. I grabbed my pack and ran like my life depended on it, because honestly, I think that it did. I don't remember getting back to the car. I don't even remember driving home. I just remember slamming the door behind me and sitting there in the dark for hours, shaking, gun still in my hand. I haven't told anyone up until now, because I know that people think that I'm crazy. Heck, I think I'm crazy sometimes when I replay it in my head. But I know what I saw, and I'm telling you that if you ever find yourself out near Owl Hollow, just turn around. Get out while you still can, because some places are probably just better off forgotten. Just to give a bit of context first, I've been training for long-distance hiking for the past few months now. I cannot drive, so I tend to go in the local area, which, to be honest, I'm quite bored of now, but I also suck at reading maps, and I've been doing this solo, so I know that I can look after myself alone. Well, last Monday, I was on my usual trek. I had become lost a few times and found myself on private land, when I noticed that I had just backtracked a bit. No issues. This happened 3 times on this particular walk, which had added an extra 10 miles now. I was heading back home my usual way, which I had done countless times when I went over on my ankle a bit. I knew that if I went on my usual way that it would be an extra 6 miles, which I really want to do, so I looked at my map and saw a private route which cut right through the forest. I'm normally a rule follower for sure, but I knew that I couldn't make it in any other way, so I trespassed. Now, this route would be 3 miles shorter. I started down the path and all was well for the first half mile. There was a stream with a waterfall, which was all quite pleasant, despite the fact that I was dragging my leg. But then I noticed the forest was getting very dense and the trees were bigger than the ones that I'd seen in the other forest that I passed through. This really surprised me, since I joke with my friends about all the trees looking the same, but the trunk on these trees were huge, the biggest that I'd seen, with the bases the size of a small house even. The trees genuinely looked like something out of a fairy tale. Further down the path, I noticed that there were sudden bluebells, more than I had ever seen, surrounding everything. This went on for about a mile, and then I noticed random 3-foot-tall stones that looked purposeful and very old. I'm used to seeing old stone markers, but something about the shapes were odd. Maybe markers, or perhaps graves? I'm unsure, to be honest. I had seen animals all the way through my hike, but for some reason not here. Instead, it was eerily silent. I stopped to take a picture of the bluebells, and then what looked like a leg suddenly came out of the grass near the base of a tree. I jumped out of my skin. I'm miles from anyone on land that I shouldn't even be on without any signal on my phone. I thought it might have been a bloating body which made the leg suddenly pop up. I got myself together though and took a few deep breaths and went to check. I walked over and it was just a solid log. But I swear that I saw it come out of the grass near the tree, but it was a log. Well, I keep on walking but quicken my pace. Ankle is killing me at this stage. Then I heard a door slam. I can assure you though that there were no buildings here. Maybe it was just a tree? I'm trying to be rational, but what happened next really messed me up when I heard someone speak. But it was like right next to my ear. I could feel the warmth of the breath even. "Leave here," is what it said. I instantly turned around thinking that somebody was there, but there was no one. There was nothing there. But there was no way that someone could sneak off and run away that quickly. Well, I break out into a full sprint. To heck with my ankle too, I just need to get out of here. I reach the end of the path and it's a 15-foot tall chained gate. There's no way that I'm heading back down that trail, so I find that the top of one of the walls is broken, making it about 10 foot. I haul my 5-foot tall butt over it and I just sit by the side of the road for a minute, catching my breath. I was looking back through the gate, waiting for someone or something to show itself, but nothing ever happened. It's been over a week and I just feel the need to go back there. I don't want to, sort of, but I'm also just completely perplexed by what the heck happened. I understand that I might have dehydrated or something, but I've been doing this for months and nothing like this has ever happened before. This is England. There was no building or residence on that land. And really, I just have no idea what that was. This is a bit of a short one, but I would genuinely love your opinions. So, basically, me and my whole family were just camping at Penderosa Reservoir in California, if that name sounds familiar to anyone. Me and my brother, we were going fishing, and it's late at night by this point. We're walking down a trail 5 minutes away from our campsite, down to a burned-down cabin, which has trash everywhere, and everything about it is just creepy as heck. Someone could definitely stalk you from all the overgrowth there, so I don't know why we went fishing down there, but we tried to find a good spot, and as we go down, I start getting this feeling that something is just watching us, which I've never really felt before, until now, and it made me really creeped out. So much so that I had my brother walk me back. He ended up going back to the same spot to go fishing, unfazed by the whole thing. And while he's sitting on a rock, something starts moving down in the bush behind him. He was telling it to get away and it stopped for a second. Then he turned around and it was starting to move closer to him from what he could hear. So he moves to the other side of the fishing spot. And that is when he really started tripping because it moved with him through all the brush and the ivy growing there. Obviously, he really starts getting creeped out, but still continues to fish. Honestly, I don't even know how, but he's just crazy like that. He ended up catching another fish at some stage, and just as he's taking the hook out of the mouth, he hears it run again, and the fish flies out of his hand. My brother runs back to the other side. Also, too, in order to get to the fishing spot, you have to climb down a steep hill, and whatever this thing was right up the hill. As he looks up, he saw its face and neck, and he tells us that whatever it was, it had no eyes or mouth or nose, just ears, a neck, a sort of face, a sort of spot where a face should have been, and it was squatting in the bush. He screamed at it to leave him alone, and that's when he called us, so we go out to get him, and he ran it away as he was talking to us. We get down there to him, and he seemed like he was keeping it together just and didn't want to scare us. He told our mum what it was, and they didn't want to speak about it while it was dark. So he told us this morning, and I just cannot get over whatever this thing was. So I'm a 34-year-old male now, and this happened to me about, 30 years ago now. I've told friends and family, and they all swear that it was a bad dream, but I just know in my heart that it wasn't. Not many people remember things when they're that young unless it's really stuck with them, but I've never forgotten the fear that I felt, I guess. And I can honestly say that I remember it perfectly, as if it happened yesterday, in fact. So, I was a very happy kid growing up, youngest of 4 boys, huge age gap between me and my 3 older brothers. When I was 4 years old, though, I slept in my parents' room. I had a small kid bed in there with them. I don't remember ever having many experiences up until then, but even if I did, who knows if I would remember. But this I could not forget. I do, however, remember always feeling very scared when it came time for bed, I guess. I'm not sure what caused my stress, but I remember feeling really anxious. Well, one night my mother put me down for bed. Her and my dad also got into their bed. I remember I hated when my mum would leave. I always felt very scared, as if someone was around and could take me at any moment. I would always ask her to rub my back until I would doze off, and even then I would hold her hand so that she wouldn't leave. Even though my parents were only 5 feet away at their bed, I always felt uneasy. I never watched any scary movies or had any real reason to feel scared, mind you. I just sort of was. This night went like any other as well. Mum puts me to bed, I fall asleep, and at some point, or so I think, I remember I was laying on my stomach when I feel someone rub my chest and caress my face. I genuinely thought that it was still my mum who was there, but it felt foreign too. It felt like it shouldn't be happening. I was instantly terrified, but I was also too scared to fully open my eyes. In a moment of bravery, I slowly peeked with one eye. I probably woke up the neighborhood, but I screeched so loud that my throat instantly felt hoarse, because in front of me, I see just a dark figure, about 6 foot plus tall, no face, no nothing. It was definitely the figure of a body though, except it was a pitch black outline. I could definitely make out every detail as well. Arms, legs, torso. It was literally a body just standing there staring at me. The strangest thing is that I couldn't see any features though, nothing. It should be noted though that there was no furniture or nothing in front of me as well. My small little bed actually faced the room door. I felt tears just pour down my face and the terror was immense, but I couldn't look away. I was fixated while yelling as if I saw a murderer. I finally mustered the strength to close my eyes, and a few seconds later, I feel hands on my shoulders and I start swinging and screaming even louder. This time though, it's my mother, and she tells me to calm down and that it's all okay. I quickly look around and the figure was now gone. I was sitting up in my bed with my mum's arms wrapped around me, and I was traumatized and scared. As I said, to this day, I have never forgotten about that night. The figure that I saw and the fact that I made my mum stay up until 4 a.m. because I refused to go into my bed is confirmation too that I haven't forgotten. I finally convinced her to let me sleep with them in their bed that night. Strangely enough, even now as an adult, I feel that fear that I felt when I was 4. Sometimes I wake up and open my eyes and I can feel and see that figure watching me. Now I'm less scared and tell myself that it's nothing and that it's all just in my head, and just turn over and go back to sleep. But deep down I feel like whatever it is, it still continues to visit me. I don't believe it to be warm and kind. I believe it to be intrigued and devious. I don't talk much about experiences nowadays, but that first encounter, that one has never left my mind. I do believe that something was there. What though? I don't think that I'll ever know. I'm really not sure how to start this off, so I guess I'll begin with the very first encounter, if you will, that I can remember having. I've always been pretty skeptical of ghosts and all things paranormal. I have a hard time believing things that I've never seen or experienced firsthand. But some pretty tough things happened in my personal life, and they all led me to move in with my ex and his family, which consisted of his parents and his little brother. I moved into their house, and the first year or two, nothing weird or out of the ordinary happened. I do feel it's important to mention that I'd fall asleep listening to YouTubers often. Yes, I'm a bit weird, sue me, but anyway, one night my ex was gone on a 24-hour shift, so it was just me and his parents and his siblings. It was around midnight and I was playing a game on my PC. I had one of the headphones hanging off of my ear, and that's when I heard the noise of something smacking the ground. I turned around and was fully convinced that it was just one of my cats knocking something off of my bed. That's when I immediately noticed that all three cats were laying at the head of the bed, two of them cutely enough snuggled into each other. And then I see what fell. A small box of pads that I'd bought for myself a few hours prior. Now, I know that I had those set at the foot of the bed, but not so close that they'd slip and fall off the bed themselves. And even so, they landed about 3 feet out from my bed, so it wouldn't even make sense in the grand scheme of things, really. Because if they truly just slipped off the bed on their own, they wouldn't just land 3 feet away from my bed. It's a square box falling on even and flat ground, not a ball that has potential to roll or anything. I remember being really weirded out by that, but just sort of thought, weird, but whatever, and went back to my game. My next incident happened a few weeks later. Again, my ex was at work on another 24. It was around midnight, and I decided to give in to the grumbling of my stomach. I went downstairs, made me a little snack, and snuck back upstairs. At the top of the stairs was a sort of baby gate thing to prevent their dogs from sneaking downstairs at night and getting into things that they shouldn't. I was in the middle of snaking my leg sort of over the gate when I very vividly heard someone whisper my name. It was so odd. It sounded like it was right there in my ear as well, at the corner of the hallway. It was so loud, and it was a clear whisper. I mean, there was just absolutely no mistaking it to be something else. Plus, I have a pretty unique name, so it's highly unlikely that something else would imitate the sound of my name. I'd already had my phone flashlight on, albeit being pointed at the ground due to the act of me not so gracefully trying to scale over the baby gate. But I immediately flung my phone flashlight up and shone it in the direction of where I heard the whisper. And to my surprise, there was absolutely nobody there. In fact, the entire hallway was empty, so still and so eerie. I even poked my head into the bedroom of the parents and the little brother to ensure that one of them weren't playing a trick or a joke on me. And of course, everyone was sound asleep. I did ask the entire household the next day if they were messing around with me, and they just all looked at me like I was crazy. To this day, I still cannot explain just how real it was, and how loud and clear and concise that whisper was, the way that it dragged my name out like how they do in horror movies. Every time I think about it too, it genuinely sends chills just down my spine. Anyway, about a year later, my ex and I split, and I moved back home with my mum. I haven't experienced anything since, but I do from time to time get that feeling of someone watching me. Like, sometimes it feels like I'm just not quite alone, I guess is the best way to put it. It never feels dangerous, I guess, just more unnerving. But that could very well just be my mind playing tricks on me, as I know a lot of people experience that phenomenon. I also feel it's important to note too that nobody else in that household ever experienced anything, or at least claimed to. In fact, they all thought that I was crazy or just imagining these things. It was just me who had these two experiences. But what do you guys think? Could this be an attachment? Could it have been something that was just lingering around the house at a certain time? I really don't know much about the paranormal world, and I spent most of my life not believing, up until these two incidents, that is. I've been living with my mother for about 6 months now, and like I said, nothing else has happened. Just that creepy feeling that refuses to leave. I've always been sort of a bit of a skeptic on all things paranormal. and while I do believe to some degree that there might be something out there, I usually take it with a grain of salt. However, I've started to notice some odd things going on in my home, and while I've tried to rationalize a logical explanation for what could be going on, genuinely I'm stunted. And honestly, I think that I should give it a shot, just throwing my story here to see if you guys can help me out. So, the first thing that happened was years ago, around 2020 to 2021, I believe. And I remember that it was late at night at about 11 p.m. or so. I'm certainly a bit of a night owl, so I stay up late often, usually just watching memes or reading or whatever. I get thirsty and go downstairs to get a drink of water. I'm by myself downstairs, my family are all in their rooms, and I heard no one getting up and moving around, so I knew that I was the only one down there. As I'm drinking my water, I notice movement out of the corner of my eye, outside of the window just above our kitchen sink. I remember it vividly too. It was a pale, transparent figure walking across the side of our house. I could clearly see legs, a torso, but it was also so dark and the only light being reflected was coming from inside of my home. At first, I was confused because I thought to myself, that wasn't what I thought it was it? I got concerned, thought maybe it was an intruder. So I went upstairs and told my dad. He takes his gun and our dog and starts walking around the house to search for this intruder, but he found nothing. I still cannot help but think of how weird it was though, because I remember where I saw the figure and the direction that it was headed. It led to a dead end at my house, so I don't know where it was going, who or what it was, or how it even got away. The second encounter, this one happened pretty close in time from my first story. I'd say maybe a couple of months later. And although I didn't see anything, it was the noise that it made that scared the ever-living you-know-what out of me. So again, it was at night. This time it was around, I would say 1 to 2 in the morning. House is dead silent, everyone is asleep, except me obviously, and I'm downstairs by myself getting another glass of water. Now, as I'm about to head upstairs, I freeze and all of a sudden I hear this terrible, inhumane and guttural snarl coming from the front door. I instinctively stopped moving, like every bone in my body was telling me not to do anything. Don't blink, don't breathe, and do not move. Whatever this thing was did not sound like any animal that I'd ever heard before. It couldn't have been a bear, since they don't come down this far. It could have been a dog with rabies or something, but it still doesn't explain the noise that it made. It just sounded wrong, and almost like full of hate. Whatever the case though, it made me feel unsafe in my own home, which was completely locked up, doors and windows shut, lights off and all that. Yet there I was in the dark, not moving a muscle because my gut told me to just stand still, and I don't even know what I was hiding from. I think I waited a good minute until my body told me that it was safe to move again, and then I slowly tiptoed to the window by the door and peeked through the blinds. Nothing. Nothing at all. No dog, no animal, no weirdo drunk, nothing. And so I just went upstairs and I went to bed. The third thing that happened, and this one was fairly recent, happened at the beginning of this year. This time it was around 8 p.m. It was just me and my 3 dogs and cat, and other than that I was completely home alone. I'm taking my dogs outside to go to the bathroom like I always do, and when they're done I get ready to open the door and I notice immediately that they're all pretty excited to come inside. Not that strange, but something just told me that it was a bit odd. Anyway, as soon as I let them inside and shut the glass door, I hear 3 taps on the glass directly in front of my face. I know that it happened too because my dogs heard it as well, heads tilted, ears straight and everything. I remember looking up at it as soon as I heard the taps, and all I saw was just pitch black and an empty backyard. Nothing was in front of the door. In that second, I just looked away and shut the blinds, and in the end, I chose to ignore it. At first, I thought it was my parents coming home and they were trying to get my attention or something. But that confused me because why wouldn't they just come through the front door? Then I thought that maybe it could have been a stranger, which is an even bigger concern, I suppose. We have recently installed some security cameras outside of our house, and we have a camera pointed at our backyard sliding door. When I went to go and check the backyard camera, it showed nothing though. No recent events, no movement picked up. The latest footage recorded was from 5 p.m. and the live feed showed nothing. There was nothing outside, and yet I know that I heard 3 distinct taps on that glass in front of my face, almost as if it was, well, whoever it was, wanted me to know. I have no idea what any of this means, and I don't know why it started happening. So far, all I'm doing is ignoring it and hoping that it just goes away, but who knows? That is also really all I have to say. Believe it or not, I don't really care. I know what I saw, and I know my truth, and, well, that's that. Just for some context, I live in Germany and I'm 23 now, but I was 20 at the time. So, I was on my way home from a party in the city. Since I had been drinking, I took the tram. Unfortunately, I had to get off at a stop because the tram only went so far, about 3 stops from my actual destination, in fact. And since it was dark, around 1 or 2 in the morning, and I didn't feel like walking through a forest, I decided to wait 45 minutes for the next tram. There were a few houses nearby, a swimming pool in the forest, obviously. At the tram stop, nobody else was around. Then, a woman approached me. She looked to be around 50 years old with a backpack. She seemed quite confused, but not threatening. She was wearing slightly ripped jeans and shoes. She only asked me what my name was. I told her that it was Tom. She asked me if I was also taking the tram, and I said yes. Then, out of nowhere, she sat down on the ground and started telling me this story, warning me to be careful. She said that she had problems with some Bulgarians involved in pimping or something. It was so random that I just couldn't even really process it. She seemed drunk and also gave off the vibe that she might have a mental illness or something. Still, I felt like she needed someone to talk to, and people like that can be unpredictable, so I listened, even though it really didn't feel right. She kept talking about her daughter and her son, and then later claimed that she didn't even have a son, even though I had asked her how old he was. She kept circling back to the Bulgarians, though, like it was some kind of an obsession or a tic or something. She mentioned her daughter was a prostitute, and that she didn't want that for her, and she repeated that a lot. She asked if I had a girlfriend, but before I could answer, she immediately switched back to talking about her daughter again. This went on for about 25 to 30 minutes, until she asked me if I had a cigarette. I said no, and she said maybe she still had some. She started shaking out her backpack tissues and chains came out, and then suddenly a knife fell out of the bag. It was kind of like a small dagger, I guess, and I was a bit shocked and froze a bit. She kept looking for the cigarettes while I was thinking, oh no, this is getting way too creepy. The fact that she seemed mentally unstable didn't help at all either. She didn't find any cigarettes, sat back down on the ground and just said, well, I guess we're not smoking then. The knife was laying on the ground the whole time, mind you, and I tried my best to ignore it. My instinct was to run, but I didn't think that would be a good idea. I didn't know what might happen if I tried, so I stayed calm and kept the conversation going, asking her random questions. She never really answered directly, just sort of kept rambling, and eventually she gathered her stuff and picked up the knife. She asked if I thought it was cool or something, and I said, yeah, it's cool, or something like that. Honestly, I had no idea what else to say. Then she said a sentence that I will never forget. She said, I only used it for the Bulgarian. No one touches my daughter. She said it in a very serious tone, then laughed and said it was a joke. I forced a fake laugh, but by then I was way too creeped out. Thank God that the tram arrived shortly after that too. My goal was to sit at the very front near the driver, just in case anything happened, but out of nowhere, she decided not to get on the tram. No idea why. She stood up, said goodbye to me, and just told me to stay the way that I am. When the tram doors opened and I quickly got in, she waved at me and then disappeared behind a hedge. When I got home, I thought about it for a few minutes too. She definitely had some type of mental illness, but at the same time, she was kind to me. Well, kind of, I guess. Like she had two personalities almost. Sometimes serious, sometimes nice. I still don't know what the deal was with the Bulgarian, but maybe he didn't even exist. Maybe she lost her daughter, and maybe that story was just a way of coping or something. Or maybe her daughter really was trapped in prostitution and she was planning something. I never did see that woman again, and honestly, that's probably for the best. This happened a couple of hours ago. I was puttering around the house, picking things up and making sure the house was set for the evening. As I walked into the kitchen to put some things away, I saw that the back sliding door was open. I remembered that I had heard the furnace kick on earlier, so I decided to close and lock the door for the evening to prevent any more unnecessary heat loss. I was about to tell my partner that I was locking the house up for the night when I remembered that I had left my tools outside. So instead of closing and locking the door, I opened the door and went out onto the deck to collect my tools. I gathered everything together, came inside, and was unable to close and lock the door for the night. After doing so, I announced to my partner that I had closed and locked the back door for the night as a way to help me remember and so that he was aware that it had been done. Simple enough, right? Side note too, I guess that he never heard me, but I specifically remember saying it out loud because this is something that I do to help me remember things better. If I say it out loud, then it doesn't stay stuck in my head and get forgotten. I hope that makes some sense. Anyway, immediately after closing and locking the door, I set my tools down on the kitchen floor and watched my cat come into the kitchen through the little cat door cut out of the bottom of our basement door, located in the kitchen. She likes sitting and staring out into the backyard when we have it open, so she's sort of been coming to the back door every time that she hears it open or close. Classical conditioning at its finest, right? Well, I then took the drill battery and the charger from the tools that I carried inside to the kitchen, and I put them in the island to plug them in. With the battery plugged into the charger and the charger plugged into the outlet, I began walking out of the kitchen when I suddenly got hit by a cold breeze. As I looked in the direction that I felt the cold air coming from, I was shocked to see my cat laying down and staring out of the sliding door that is now open about 6 inches. My mind started reeling, going over every second from the time that I locked that door to the time that I saw it open. It couldn't have been more than 20 to 30 seconds at most, and that's being really generous. Now, as my brain was breaking, I felt my whole body begin to shake and my eyes well up with tears. I had no control over this physiological response, nor had I ever experienced this type of reaction to a perceived paranormal event. I was so confused, and everything just felt so strange. I stumbled around for a few seconds trying to get my bearings. I finally made it to the living room and sat down on the armrest of the couch to tell my partner what had just happened. He got up to go and look and now opened the sliding door. He was skeptical, understandably, saying that I probably just got distracted plugging in the battery and forgot to close and lock the door. That totally sounds like something that I could do as well. That must have been what happened, right? Problem is that I remember exactly what my order of operations was from the time that I walked into the kitchen to the time that I stumbled out. I've certainly had some easily dismissible things happen since we moved into this house 8 months ago. Knocks, footsteps, shadows out of the corner of your eye. But all of this was so easily dismissible that it's not even worth mentioning. With one minor exception, I guess. I've gone downstairs in the morning to see one of the battery-operated taper candles turned on in our dining area 3 times within the past few months, the last time being only 2 days ago. But again, totally dismissible, right? But this time, I know that I locked it. So, now what? Is this a glitch in the Matrix? Does my cat have telekinetic powers? Or maybe a friendly entity opened it for her? I have no idea, and I'm sure that you don't either, but that's okay. I'm not really looking for answers necessarily. I just needed to get it out, and I figured that I could entertain a few people with a very real, very true story of a strange event that I just cannot seem to wrap my head around. I know lots of people don't believe in ghosts, and you know what? That's fine. I don't even know if what I have is a ghost. I don't really know what's happening at all, to be honest. Whatever is going on, it's happening more, and so I thought that I should get some help and share this. So ever since I was little, I've heard voices calling my name. Always feminine, never sounded the exact same, though it usually sounded like my mum. It's consistent too. For as long as I can remember, I've heard it. I honestly chalked it up to auditory hallucinations. I don't really have any mental illness that could cause it, but your mind can play tricks on you when you're alone, so that made sense to me. And I was always alone when it happened, so I kept it to myself and I just ignored it. Things around me would go missing consistently though, which I just thought was my forgetfulness. But I'd look somewhere for something, and then 3 days later, that's exactly where it was. It's been like this for a long time too, but it's never been something that affected anyone else. Until a few years ago, when my friend would hear another woman's voice coming through on phone calls, like someone was standing next to me, trying to sort of talk over me. But she could never make out what they were saying, and I personally never heard it too. I just assumed that it was something weird with my phone, and again I tried to ignore it. Also, I had this little glass bottle with a cork in it that would disappear and reappear, but always with something new inside of the bottle. Nothing crazy, but just stuffing from the dolls that I make out of fur for one of my dogs usually. I left it in a drawer in my living room, and I would check to see if it was there daily. It could have been my husband playing a prank on me for sure, but truthfully, he's not really the type. Though, since I never set up a camera to record him, I won't really know for sure. Anyway, fast forward to now, I'm staying with my parents for a short time. My mum and I are sitting in the living room talking to each other when, clear as day, I hear the voice call my name. It sounded like somebody was right next to my ear as well. I made eye contact with my mother and I asked if she heard it. She said, "Someone saying your name?" And I nodded. She said yes, she heard it too. Now, this blew my mind because this is the first time somebody else has been around and heard it too. No one else was in the house as well. The TV was on, but we rewinded the show that we were watching and it definitely didn't come from the TV. Weird. But again, I chose to ignore it. Now, a friend of mine has been sleeping on call with me in Discord. I have a little mic on my desk that I use for streaming, and sometimes I have Discord connect to that mic. And at some point, my friend asked me if my little sister comes into my room in the middle of the night to talk. I was confused because, well, I'm a pretty light sleeper. I startle awake, and it's really easy to wake me up. When anybody opens my door, I immediately wake up, in fact. But he explained that he would hear me snoring, but also hear my door open and hear a little girl talking, and said that it sounds almost exactly like my sister. He said that it sounds like she's playing. He cannot understand what she's saying, but it's loud enough that he was confused as to how I didn't wake up. I talked to my sister and confirmed that she said that it wasn't her. She said that she doesn't wake up for school until later in the morning, and even then she gets ready downstairs for the most part, usually just coming upstairs for breakfast. I again think that this is weird, but I choose to ignore it. If this is something paranormal, it Doesn't feel angry or dangerous, so I'm not really too bothered by it. The other night, though, I woke up to my dog's kennel door being slammed open against the wall. It scared me half to death, and he was in bed with me. He freaked out after staring at the kennel for a few seconds and hid under the bed. I'll admit that I was a little bit spooked, but I just went back to sleep because, what else am I supposed to do? But then, a couple of days ago, I literally watched my bedroom door open on its own. Like, I heard the latch click and the door opened by itself. I can affirm that nobody was there and no one but me was home. I was getting ready for work, so Puppy was in the kennel. And with that, I decided to investigate a little bit because why not? Even if it's silly and not real, I like spooky stuff, so I thought that I would do some research. So I downloaded an app that records noises in the room around me while I sleep, and some sounds captured are clear footsteps, knocking, sounds like someone knocking against wood, and the one that gave me chills was something that sounded like a little kid gasping. It's not super convincing, so I won't share it, but honestly, it's been happening for so long I've just kind of decided that if I do have a ghost friend, I'm just gonna call her Patrice and let her do her thing. If it is real and not just my brain playing tricks on me, then I get to have a cool ghost friend, I guess. So yeah, I just wanted to share this experience that I've been having, and I'm going to keep recording, and if I can hear something other than a little tiny gasp, then maybe I'll share it at some point. If you have any ideas on what could be going on, besides the obvious it's the wind sort of stuff, then feel free to let me know because I'm all ears. I do like spooky stuff and I like to believe in it, so if you want to speculate or anything, then please be my guest. This happened a long time ago now, and comes from a brief yet highly disturbing encounter. Despite it being brief, it would eventually leave a long-lasting impression on me, and will likely remain the most messed up thing that I've ever experienced. My story began when I was a 14-year-old boy. To give some context, I was one of those part of the group but not one of the group types, shy and sort of reserved. I had friends but not much beyond school hours. So when one of my friends wanted me to hang out with her, it made a welcome change to my quiet after-school routine of video games. We walked back to hers from school, and she invited me into her house. As I walked in, I saw whom I quickly assumed was her dad, with his back to me preparing food. This was the first time I'd been introduced to him, and my first impression would quickly be, putting it very mildly, not great at all. As my friend introduced me, he turned around to face me holding a large kitchen knife. Suddenly, he lurched towards me as if he stumbled forward, yelling, "Whoa!" He quickly turned the knife, pushing the handle quite hard into my chest. He then smirked with the eeriest expression on his face and said, only joking. My heart was pounding, and inwardly I was freaking out, and while I tried to nervously laugh it off, I'm sure my face clearly said otherwise. My friend just laughed it off as Dad fooling around and led me to their living room, but as I sat down, I couldn't shake the uneasy gut feeling I had now. I tried to shake it off and talk to my friend, but her dad promptly entered the living room. They had music playing moderately loud on a stereo, and he cranked the volume to a level that sounded like a live band was in there with us. My friend followed him to the kitchen and soon returned. She told me that she had to go to the store to get something for him and asked if I wanted to wait for her as it wasn't too far. Given the rather creepy encounter, my gut instinct was having none of it and I wouldn't be ignoring it. So I quickly got up and I left with my friend for the store. I cannot say exactly how the rest of the day went as I really cannot remember, but I do know that I didn't return to that house again. I wouldn't speak of what happened after that for quite some time and just chalked it up to a really freaky interaction, locking it away in my mind. However, it wouldn't end there. He would set foot into our house a year later, dropping my friend off at a family party that we were having. I didn't interact with him then, though my dad offered him a beer and later recalled how he just stood there in a corner alone, watching everyone. I would see my friend's dad for the third time a couple of years later, this time on TV, as the face of the man convicted for the abduction and murder of a woman who went missing a week prior. I was stood there, right as the story broke of who he was. I will never, for as long as I live, forget the sensation of my blood turning to ice in my veins. My parents later commented how they literally saw the color drain on my face in that moment. Yet in the days that followed, it only got worse. He would go on to confess while in custody to the abduction and murder of a woman who had been missing for 20 years by that point. Following corroborations of things that he had said previously, along with expert analysis, this led the police to believe that he may have actually been a prolific serial killer. He was soon probed as a potential suspect in almost half a dozen unsolved missing person cases. However, due to a lack of evidence and further confession, his involvement in these remain, well, unclear. My mind still occasionally wanders to that first encounter, and even though his choice of victims seemed to be women, I can't help but think about that music cranked up so loud, how my friend asked me if I wanted to wait for her at the house with him. If I had stayed, what would have happened to me, if anything at all? Was there a part of him that was curious, wondering about switching things up a little? Or was that knife held to my chest truly just the harmless joke of a serial killer? When I was 4 years old, I had cancer. When I was 5, the Make-A-Wish Foundation built me a cubby house next to our shed. I would go down there nearly every day and play. And one day, however, I noticed what looked like a man standing in the trees behind the shed. Naturally, I stayed away from it. When I had friends over, my friend, who was 2 at the time, would scream and cry about not going near the trees, and everyone made fun of her. Whatever it was, it would never appear when adults were around her, sometimes vanishing when we tried to point it out to our older siblings and parents. One day, though, I decided to check out the area on my own without supervision. And I came across the man, except he had 4 arms, a green coat, and a jester's cap on. He had red eyes and pasty skin with red polka dots. He looked at me and sighed a big sigh as if he had found me after looking for me for so long. I noticed he started inching closer, and that was when I decided to run away. I eventually told my grandparents, who thought that I had watched the movie Clowns. My friend then says that she saw a jester under the trees, wearing red and white and having a pin on its chest. Apparently it used to reach out to her and watch her through her window at night. But does this sound familiar to anyone? Has anyone come across something like this? I came across something online called a Caraveldi, whose profile picture and description match nearly identically to this. If you know anything, then please do share your thoughts. So I live in a 40s concrete duplex, and ever since moving in a year ago, things always feel a little tense once the sun goes down. And every now and then things are moved around whenever you leave a room and come back, and occasionally whenever I'm up late working on my computer, I'll see white figures out of the corner of my eye, always in the same spot in the room. I also once had a sleep paralysis encounter where I saw it clearly as it zoomed across the room at me, but I think that I really messed up just now. So my bedroom door faces into a small hallway, and I've always made sure that when coming into my room, I always face my bed and never look away until the door is closed behind me. I don't know why I started doing this or even remember where it started, but it's just like an instinct, I guess. A few minutes ago, though, around 11:40 p.m., I got hungry, so I went to the kitchen to grab something to eat, but when I came back to my room, I don't know why I did it, but as I closed the door, I took a glance behind me into the hallway and saw something that I can only compare to like a mix of SCP-1471 and No-Face from Spirited Away, like this white mask-like face, a little taller than me, and I don't think that I saw a body. I'm sharing this on my computer, and I just feel like a kid getting called to the principal's office, and I keep looking away to the spot in my room that the white thing likes to be at, because it keeps feeling like someone is standing next to me, and I keep seeing like a swishing white blur, like someone waving a sheet out of the corner of my eye. Also, just recently I froze in place because I could have sworn that it felt like someone put their hand on my shoulder for a couple of seconds. I don't know what to do about any of this, so I hope that somebody will hear this and will be able to help me. I'm not exactly sure how to start this off, but this is going to be a collection of paranormal experiences that I've had through the 31 years of my life, from early years like 1993 up to about February of 2024. Some of the timelines might be a bit fuzzy, but the events are true. I'll start with childhood and lead up to the present day. So I grew up in a house with both parents and a sister, in a fairly new single-story house with absolutely no paranormal history. My sister is just shy of 2 years younger than me. At birth, my sister and I had been baptized and grown up in a Catholic family. Our parents weren't very churchy people, I guess, but our grandparents were the old-school heavy Catholic type. My parents would recall stories to us when we were very little, such as my room was the coldest in the house no matter what. This could be caused from how the ventilation was built for the house, so that wasn't anything too wild. Other things they said were hearing loud bangs on the other side of the house when they're home, pantry doors and silverware drawers being opened when they would come home, and having the washer and dryer start up on their own. They don't remember any of this happening prior to me, the firstborn, being born. As far as I'm aware, they never sold my soul to any demons or anything, because we sure never had much luck or money. But as far as this activity goes, I don't really remember any of this taking place, and I feel like if I did, I wouldn't understand the magnitude of it all anyway. One instance, though, I do recall, is being around 7-ish years old and being at a close friend's house. We were sitting on the floor of his bedroom playing Yu-Gi-Oh! He had one of those small Nickelodeon TVs in there, and the remote was on the floor. While we were playing, the remote was going back and forth under his bed and out toward us. We just stared at this in awe. Not realizing this was insane, we just went on about our lives as if nothing happened. Moving into later childhood and teen years, that was when things really picked up. Now, my sister had started to tell my mum and I that she was seeing shadows and felt uncomfortable. My mum also told us that she was seeing shadows and it was intermittent when things would occur. I had personally never seen what they were talking about and was thankful for that. All I recalled during that time was hearing footsteps outside of my room. We had since moved into a trailer due to some tragic life issues, and my mum would tell us that it was some animal under the floor causing the noises. I put full faith into that thought at the time, but looking back, there is just no way. The footsteps as well would be a constant until I moved out. I was in this home from 5 years old till about 22. Now, growing up, I would always stay the night at friends' houses for Halo LAN parties and try to recreate the food that we saw in Epic Mealtime. One of my friends had some paranormal things going on over there, and I cannot specifically tie these events to what I dealt with, but I just think it was a wild coincidence. So he had told us that he believed that a little girl was haunting his house, and had dealt with various things like noises and sightings. One specific night, I remember laying on the floor going to bed after another solid gaming sesh, and I could hear this Faith Carousel music. I put up with it for a few minutes and finally said, "Hey, could you shut off the volume on your DS? We can't sleep." Turns out, he was out cold, and that wasn't him. After I woke him up, we just sat there and stared at each other. He told me that he had toys in the attic and that he thought the little girl was playing with them. So, like most level-headed teenage boys, we decided to ghost hunt. At the time, the show on Sci-Fi, Ghost Hunters with the Taps team, was huge. We had this old school recording device and we would walk around the house asking questions, waiting for a response. We finally got the courage to crawl into the attic where the noises had been coming from and began to have a classic EVP session. It was pitch black outside of the small little flashlight that we brought, and there were about 5 of us seated on the beams asking whatever came to our minds. After some time up there and no responses, that we could hear anyway, we wrapped up and we came down, but left the recorder up there for a period of time that escapes my memory. As we played the tape back, we got to the point where we shut the attic and were all back downstairs, and we actually caught a little girl saying what sounded like "mummy," and that was terrifying to us. I mean, we got what we wanted to find, but you don't really think that you would hit on anything. Fast forward a bit towards high school, my mum would ask me if I was moving shampoo bottles in her bathroom. And as a typical teenage jerk, I love doing pranks, but this wasn't me, and my sister isn't that kind of person at all. This would happen maybe once a month or so, it felt like. Along with this too, we would have lights turn on and off. My mum would find ways to debunk things as to not scare us. The other major incident though would be doors opening and closing, but it was only always my bedroom door for some reason. From where my dad sat most nights playing games well into the early morning hours, he could see my door. He would ask me in the morning if I happened to get up last night, and it was never me opening it. My mum had tried a few times to sage the house and cleanse it of the evil spirits, but this honestly did nothing. In fact, activity never slowed down or picked up, as if she had never tried it at all. In high school, I decided to follow in the family footsteps and start a career in fire or EMS. I took a high school course for EMT and graduated with my EMT cert. I joined a volunteer fire department shortly after graduating to get some experience with the hopes to go career eventually. About 3 years after high school, my nana passed away, and I was very close with her, and this was a sudden death as well. She had always been a big advocate for me, pushing myself and achieving my dreams. I had landed a job at a large ambulance company and was eager to start. I had everything laid out the night before, like the first day of school, ready for my first day. At around 4 a.m. while I was asleep in my room, I remember waking up to my door opening and a short figure standing in the doorway with no discernible features. As I stared at it, I wasn't scared or nervous and felt no malice. The door shut after 15 seconds or so, and I just sort of sat there for a bit, processing everything. This was the first time that I personally saw the shadow figures my family was talking about this whole time. That morning, I told my mum about what had happened, and she said that it wasn't her opening it. She suggested the thought that it could have been my nana checking on me on my first day. She was about 5'2" on a good day, so in my head that sort of added up with what I saw, and so I just went about life. Fast forward a few years, I'm now a firefighter paramedic in a career department, and I've proposed to my high school sweetheart. We just got our own apartment in a neighboring city, and we have our first pup, a wiener dog named Rocky. My fiancée was aware of some of the things that happened to me and my family growing up, but we had no idea that things were going to continue once I moved out. Our lives in this apartment pretty much consisted of me working my rotation of 24 hours on a 48 hours off, which is a pretty standard firefighter schedule, and Erica was going to school to become a dental hygienist. And this apartment is when I began to start connecting some dots that maybe it wasn't just the house that had haunting issues. Small things would happen here, and it was never when my fiancée was home. The apartment was about 900 square feet, so if there was a noise, I would definitely hear it. The things that I would experience here were lights turning on and off, but they wouldn't be in the room that I was in. For instance, the bathroom would turn on and I would be in the kitchen. The toilet would flush on its own, and we had motion sensor rope lights in our small walk-in closet in our bedroom that would turn on in the middle of the night. I remember feeling like someone was with me, but I never felt like it was harmful, just like I was in a crowded room in a sense. I remember hearing female whispers, but would often chalk it up to being in an apartment, even though most of the place would be vacant during the day with my neighbors being at work. During this time, I began to have very traumatic calls at work, the biggest event being one where 2 toddlers were unfortunately killed. This caused my mental health to decline, and there was a strong correlation with this and the activity that seemed to surround me. I began to go through therapy to help with coping through the work issues too. Outside of these small events, nothing drastic happened in the short time that we were at this apartment. We had set our sights on purchasing a home and starting a family. By this time, Erica had graduated and began working in her desired field, and I was as well. We had gone home shopping and found the perfect house for us in a neighboring city that was close to our jobs, family, and friends. Picking up from the apartment, we had moved into the new house and everything was perfect. We had finally made it. 2 kids from the trailer park with successful lives and a beautiful home. Things with work, however, continued to be difficult. I would go on several calls that involved horrible stuff, and working in healthcare during COVID was one of the most miserable and draining things I've ever done. My mental health was at an all-time low, and I was going to therapy on a weekly basis at this point. Through all of this, I never experienced anything at work, even though I spent so much time there. I feel like this was a catalyst for events that followed, though. Once I was at my lowest was when things escalated to new heights. One of the earliest signs something was still going on involved an artsy bathroom sign in a wall-mounted toilet paper holder. You see, my wife had this sign positioned right over this holder, and in theory, a normal household shouldn't have any issues. We heard a loud bang one day, though, and went to that small bathroom, and saw the sign on the floor. Thinking this was odd since, no door was closed, no wind was coming through, we put it back up and we shut the door. About 2 minutes later, it fell again and landed directly on the holder. Then it hit me. This thing is still here, and it was still messing with me. This proceeded to happen over and over again in the next several weeks at completely random times, and each time striking the holder. It happened so much that it finally knocked the holder off the wall, and once it was removed, that sign hasn't moved in years since then. Things began to happen more in the open and during the day, too. The first instance that was in front of my wife was in our side living room area, and my wife was cleaning the floors. We had a sort of power surge in the kitchen, and her jacket flew off the back of the chair in the dining room, which is next to the kitchen. The table was directly between my wife and I, and we both saw this. Walking into the kitchen, and all the appliances had their times reset like a power surge, but nothing else in the house had any issues. This happened at around 10 a.m. She was obviously very freaked out at this point, and it was then when I couldn't really continue to hide it. I had found various reasons to play things off and cover for excuses, but this was unexplainable. At this point, I was still in monthly therapy sessions to deal with work-related issues. Mental health had improved quite a bit, but things seemed to come in waves, as if it was building up strength and feeding on my weaknesses or something. Looking back, it felt like it would build up over several months and get progressively more constant and severe, then sort of dissipate for random amount of times. It would ramp up with events like 1 to 3 times a month, and then once a week, then a few times a week, to daily even. It would usually build up in severity and then just back to nothing. I would be downstairs in our 2-story home gaming late at night and have lights turn on where I can see them. I would begin to jokingly talk into the open and say things like, "If you're going to turn the lights on, you can pay some of the bills, trying to make light of what was happening. My wife had asked questions on the history of it, and I explained since I was a young child I had issues. She began to ask if we could look into getting rid of this thing. I always told her, unless it's causing harm, I'm not messing with it. The absolute terror of the unknown was enough for me to just deal with it, I guess, but I was a decent horror buff at this point, even though my daily life was basically one. And when thinking about things escalating, I always thought of Paranormal Activity and the scene where they put down flour and now you know the footsteps were goat hooves. You just can't unsee that sort of stuff. I functioned heavily on the ignorance is bliss approach when it came to all of this, and it probably was not the best approach, but it worked for me at the time. Anyway, after this there was a lull of a few months, just long enough to give you some hope that things might be going back to normal. At this point, my wife and I began to start trying for a kid too. I know, the only thing to make this worse would be adding a kid, but here we go. We were having infertility issues though, and this would go on for about 2 years total. And some of the things that we experienced during this time are as follows. I apologize on the chronological order of events for these, but it all becomes muddy after a bit. So I told my wife goodnight and I went to play some World of Warcraft in my office room. The door was open down the hallway initially, and as I walked closer to the door, it just sort of shut in my face. I proceeded to open it and sit down like it never happened. I truly tried my best to ignore it and move on, but we both tried to function on the thought process of just don't feed into it and hopefully it will just go away. My wife experienced things being thrown 2 different times. To preface, she almost never saw things, or it would only happen when I was home, so for her to see something was pretty significant. The first one, though, was downstairs in our living room while I was upstairs gaming. I had a t-shirt on a coffee table and it was tossed across the room while she was sitting on the couch. And the second was when she was showering. She had our JBL speaker blasting Cardi B or something, and it was thrown off of the bathroom counter onto the floor. I was also home for this one, and I remember it quite clearly. These were obviously some of the bigger events, and weaved in were the constant footsteps and light switches turned on. It also figured out how to turn on the TV and the PS5 downstairs as well. We would wake in the morning and the TV or PlayStation would just be on and idling. Channels never would change and nothing would move on the screen though. Finally though, we got the dumb idea to try and record the downstairs activity while we slept one day. I bought 2 motion sensor cameras and had them set up near areas where things would often happen. When I had cameras recording, not a thing would happen though. When I turned them off, naturally, would be the time when things would go bump downstairs. This, along with other examples, leads me to believe this was as intelligent of a haunting as you can pretty much get. Things again dissipated and picked back up like clockwork, and this next experience was worse than it had ever been before. The 3 big notable ones that I will mention are as follows. Again, I apologize for the correct order of events. The first one, though, will definitely be about my dogs. At this point, we now have 2 wiener dogs named Rocky and Sully. I wanted bigger dogs and she wanted smaller, so we compromised and got 2 smaller dogs. My wife went to work out and I was upstairs folding laundry. It was about 10:30 or 11 a.m. and she had gone for about 15 minutes at this point. My dogs were upstairs running around playing. I then heard in my wife's voice, clear as day, say, "Boys, stop barking, it's just Mama." And they stop in their tracks. I was so confused because I was 100% sure that she wasn't home. I called her real quick to see if she stopped back in because, I don't know, maybe she forgot something. And she told me that she had just pulled up to the gym. I left my room to investigate and I found nothing. That was the only instance of things for that day. The next one I can recall was another midday experience where I was home alone. It was around noon and I had just come downstairs for lunch. We had just recently had our anniversary and there was a balloon in the house, and the balloon had originally been in the dining room, and the exits of that room have maybe approximately a 1-foot slip for the doorway to go to the next room. But the balloon had left the room and was actively floating in front of me in the kitchen, slowly bobbing up and down, and it made its way to the back of the living room. For it to be able to leave the initial dining room, it definitely had to be physically moved. It wouldn't have any way to duck into the doorway either. I just stood there watching this in disbelief. But at this point, I had dealt with enough and decided to retaliate. So I grabbed a knife from the butcher's block and popped that balloon, put the knife back, and made some lunch, and I went upstairs. I had one of the dogs in my lap, watching some Twitch stream on my PC, when I just felt a burning sensation on my leg. This was maybe about 15 minutes later. I was wearing long jogger-style pants and pulled them up to see what it was, and I saw 3 long scratch marks about 1 inch apart on my thigh. This was the point that scared the absolute heck out of me, and after that, I had just turned to open the room and apologize and said that we were even and I would like to continue to try and live in harmony. And nothing else happened that day. Now, the final experience in this stretch was a little more convoluted, I guess you could say. At work, I had been going through a rough patch with very traumatic calls. I would tend to have very vivid night terrors after these as well. This batch had consisted of a few cases involving juveniles and another person versus a train, and this specific dream was different though. I was in my home and heavy footsteps were sprinting for me. I was screaming my wife's name for help and banging on walls, but no noise was coming out. I felt as if my mouth was being held shut, and I was using my hands to pry my mouth free. I had actually awoke and was screaming my wife's name when I woke up, which obviously really messed up the both of us. But this was the peak of the activity for this stretch. After this, things just seemed to die down for about a year. I had been talking with my therapist about the paranormal activity that I was dealing with, as it was a big factor in my mental health. Dealing with death at work all day and then coming home where I'm supposed to be able to unwind and relax was almost worse than working most days. We had discussed the possibility of what this could be and came up with a poltergeist style of haunting which definitely fit the description from what I could find. It basically is described as a malignant haunting that can interact with objects and feeds off of bad energy, which added up with all the depression that I had been going through with work and the infertility issues that we had, up to experiencing a miscarriage as well. At this point, we were able to have a happy, healthy baby girl in December of 2022. I don't really recall much going on at this point. I would say about 6 months into her being around was when things started to pick back up again, slowly as it had. Lights going on and off, footsteps, door handles jiggling to rooms that we're in, the go-tos of the haunting, I guess you could say. We had lightly discussed the issues of having our daughter to be in the same environment as this thing. Ever since the balloon incident, nothing violent or malicious had occurred, but I always had an uneasy feeling and just never felt alone. Around her first birthday, things began to pick up though, and we're back to a daily occurrence. I had tried to keep most of these to myself as to not spook my wife. I figured that if it was just me dealing with it, then I could just bear the burden and move on to keep the peace of everything in the household. For the first time in the history of this though, I was at work on my 24th and she was hearing things while I was away. She was putting her daughter down for bed and was hearing footsteps outside of her room and could see a shadow walking past the doorway. I remember her texting me as it was actively happening, saying that she was done with this, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. I was at the end with it too. But going back to the whole question of what the heck to do about any of this, that fear of the unknown just truly paralyzed me. I mean, what happens if we do something and it doesn't work? The house isn't haunted, my wife isn't haunted, it's me. It's followed me from 4 different houses in 4 different cities, and it has no signs of stopping. I had begun to do some research into what the heck I needed to do. I began even asking co-workers if they had anything like this, and they thought that I was absolutely crazy. Not that I blame them. My lieutenant kept asking if I had any photo or video proof, and I told him that I tried once, but never again. Once I knew what was in there, it would have been game over, to be honest. For Christmas, though, my wife bought me an LED gamertag sign that would light up bright red. It actually came from overseas, so I had to Amazon order an American outlet adapter for it, And once it showed up, I plugged that bad boy in and it was absolutely beautiful. For the time being, I had it sitting on the floor in our computer room. And this specific night, I had told my wife goodnight and went to go and game it up a bit. I turned on the PC and shut the door, and went downstairs to get some G Fuel and snacks. As I was walking up the stairs, I could see a red glow from underneath the door. It turned out that the neon sign had been turned on while I was out of the room. I immediately unplugged it and went about my night. Before I left, I plugged it back in and turned the remote upside down on the table. This was my own little messed up experiment to see if it was moving the remote and turning it on or not, and in hindsight this was dumb, but I mean, here we are, right? That morning when I woke up, it was on. I then unplugged it again and I went to work. A few days had gone by with nothing, and I started to use that LED sign as a ghost gauge, basically. And one night, while I was at work, I got a text from my wife asking if I had left the sign on. I believe that I lied and told her yes for ease of mind, but I knew that I hadn't. After this, there was a stretch of a few nights my wife would work long hours and I was at home with our daughter. During these days, I would hear footsteps upstairs while we were downstairs, and I began to smell something, like perfume. It was the same perfume my nana would wear, and I hadn't smelled that since she passed away many years ago. It was around this time as well that I had also begun to hear a male voice with whispers of incoherent speech, but it always sounded like distant. Over these few days, the whispering got louder and louder, to the point where it was undeniable that I was hearing whispering, but it was always just gibberish. Nothing made sense when I would hear it, and most noticeably would be when I was putting our daughter to bed, and I was lying on the floor of her dark room till she dozed off. I would just hear it constantly. Not really knowing if it was just my nerves being absolutely messed up or if it was real at this point. I didn't tell my wife about this because, yet again, I felt that I should be the one to just bear the burden, but this definitely was my breaking point. For context, it's the beginning of February at this point. Out of a shot of desperation, I tracked down my pastor from my church growing up. My kid was at my parents' house for the day while I caught up on some yard work. I drove down to a local gas station, so I didn't have the conversation in the home, but we limited as much recognition of the entity in the home as much as possible, and this was my day of escaping to call for help. I remember calling him and asking if he had some time to speak. He did remember me from when I would go as a kid, and I told him that I felt that I had something paranormal going on in my life, and I asked if he could listen and hopefully help. He was a little taken aback, but he obliged and let me tell my entire story as I just have here. He had said, "Well, knowing you and the profession you're in, I'm leaning towards the fact that this is real and you aren't having a psychiatric issue or anything." He offered to come out a few days later. He told me that he was going to contact a specific group of people he knew in the Catholic Church, whose job was to deal with exorcisms and get some advice on how to approach this. He gave me the confidence that we would solve it, and at that, I began to cry. I had mixed emotions of terror and joy, hoping this would be the end, but having no clue how this would go. I spoke with my wife about the ordeal, and the pastor was going to come and help us. He asked that we all be present in the house during this ceremony. Once he showed up to the house, he greeted us with a smile and said that he was going to bless the house and us inside of it. We walked with him to each room as he was saying prayers and tossing holy water throughout. The entire time I was waiting for the absolute worst to occur. Every horror movie you see at this point always goes to the worst thing possible and somebody dies. Once he had walked through the house and blessed each room, we then went to the living room and locked hands and prayed. This process took about 45 minutes to an hour. I'm honestly not the biggest religious guy around and mainly went to church because of family, but I was all in on this because we had no other choice, really. Father Doug then gave me the number to what I can describe as the Exorcist hotline. He said if things persist or get worse, that I could call that number immediately and they would help. But it's been about, 6 months now at the time of sharing this, as I lay in my bed at work and things have stopped completely since that day. This is all 100% true, and I have zero proof of any of this, besides the accounts of my family and myself correlating, I guess. Some people are skeptical of ghost stories, and I'm just glad mine is over for now, to be honest. I was inspired to share this and put it down here and have this chapter of my life logged somewhere, so thanks for listening and thanks for the opportunity to share all of this. I want to start by saying that I really want to believe the things that I've seen or experienced were just my mind playing tricks on me, but it's happened too often for me to dismiss it entirely. I was raised to believe that ghosts don't exist, but I also grew up hearing ghostly experiences from the same people who told me that, so I never truly dismissed the idea of ghosts, I guess. I just feel like we all share a space, and as long as we don't bother each other, it's fine. That said, I want to share the first, very visible paranormal encounter that I had. It was March 2015, and I had just finished my finals that day. After returning from school, I took a nap, felt refreshed, and around 7 p.m. there was a power cut. Power cuts are fairly common where I live, so I decided to pass the time by walking along the pathway leading to our garage, which was between our house and our garden. It was dark, but the moonlight provided enough visibility for me to see. I could see the road outside of our property clearly, but where I was standing wasn't visible to anybody passing by. Like a typical teenager, I stood there listening to music, just doing random things, and after a while I was standing in front of the garage facing the road when I suddenly felt someone behind me. Before I could turn around, I sensed that this person was bending down towards my right side, and I could see a face behind my right elbow. I turned my head to look, and it was, me. I was staring at myself, but the other me had this huge grin that I'll never forget. Honestly, I've tried to mimic it in front of mirrors, but I physically can't actually do it. I instantly ran, or more like speed walked, back into the house, unable to explain what I had just seen. It was just me and my mother at home at the time, and it wasn't even past 8 p.m. When I told her what happened, she joked that it might have been one of the guys who got murdered on our property in the 1940s. Apparently, our property used to be a well-known garden open to the public, and according to one of my grandfather's friends, 3 murders had taken place in one day there, after which people stopped visiting the garden as much. After this incident, there were other small occurrences that I ignored. At one point, I stayed in the house alone for as long as 5 months, and even during those months, I would experience things randomly. I felt taps on my shoulder, heard clapping, and once I heard what sounded like whispers outside of our living room window. That particular incident actually made me stay awake in the living room until dawn, fearing that we were about to be robbed. That's because I'm more scared of humans than ghostly beings, but these tiny occurrences didn't really bother any of my family members. But then, something happened in early 2023. My grandmother, who has dementia, had moved in with us. We always had someone attending to her so she wouldn't wander off, which she had tried to do multiple times. Grandma had her own sofa in the living room, and she would only ever sit there. This sofa was visible from the dining room, which was connected to my room, so whenever I left my room, I would see her sitting on a sofa. One evening, I decided to take a nap in my room while my mum sat with my grandma. It was just the 3 of us at home at the time. It was around 4 p.m, everything was fairly bright, but we still had our living room lights on, and instead of taking a nap, I was just sort of scrolling through my phone with my headphones on when my mum suddenly came running into my room. She frantically said something that I couldn't hear over my loud headphones. By the time I took them off, all I could hear was "Help, Grandma," and she ran out of my room toward the kitchen, trying to get to our backyard where my grandma was sitting on the floor. For some reason, she would always sit on the floor, and she was heavy enough that only my dad or I could lift her up. So I jumped out of bed and ran after my mum, but as I passed the living room, I saw my grandma sitting on the sofa. While running, I tried to ask my mum why she was heading to the backyard when Grandma was in the living room. But before I could finish my sentence, I stepped outside into the backyard and saw my grandma sitting on the floor. I stood still for a few seconds, confused, as my mum struggled to lift her up. I eventually composed myself and helped her, and that's when I realized that the grandma who was sitting on the sofa was wearing a completely different dress. I told my parents about this pretty much every evening, and also brought up what I experienced back in 2015, and that's when my mum mentioned that she too had experienced some unexplainable things. Nothing as visible as what I had seen, but she had felt things, she said. Since that day, the activities have become more common occurrences. The creepiest one for me was when I felt as if someone was climbing onto my bed while I was on it. My bed was creaking in the same way it does when anyone climbs onto it. I thought that it could be my breathing, so I held my breath for a good 20 seconds and stayed completely still, but the bed was still creaking. I freaked out at that, jumped out of bed and turned on the lights, but as usual, there was nothing there. When I got back into the bed, the creaking stopped. My parents are usually very dismissive of the idea of ghosts, but even they have sensed things that they can't explain. All we know is that whatever or whoever this might be isn't harmful, I guess. Still, I would like to believe that my mind is just making things up. This happened 25 plus years ago. Me and friends, out at a park and boat dock on the Ohio River between Cincinnati and Louisville, probably 25 miles from there, were on a dock that goes probably 30 foot out into the river with a 10 by 10 platform at the end. We're on the Kentucky side, Indiana on the other side of the river. We'd go to this park to sit on the dock and drink and just chat in a cool, quiet place. This was a regular occurrence about every other weekend. We were very familiar with the immediate surroundings, had rotating designated driver duties, and this happened on one of my weekends that I was stone cold sober. So, here's what happened. The group is drinking and having fun as usual. I'm babysitting, which usually entails keeping an eye on the top of the flood wall to see if police show up, and go to talk to them if they do, and make sure nobody falls into the river. About 2 hours in, I see a light on the other side of the river. Not bright, all the way on the other bank, or close to the bank at least. It's almost a mile away, so a little bit hard to tell, and downriver from us. I don't really care, but it's new, so I noticed it. Anyway, about 10 minutes pass and I'm watchdogging and I notice that the light is closer. I'm still not worried, but I'm responsible for a bunch of drunk people, so I'm now adding it to the very short list of things that have my interest. Another 10 or 15 minutes passes and the light has moved up my list of things that I now care about. It's definitely closer now. I'm seeing the reflection of the light on the surface of the water, so I know it's a physical object. I think maybe it's a boat. Bass boats and such have to have marker lights here, and this seems to be about the right height for that. It's maybe about 3 feet above the water, best guess at this distance, but I alert a couple of people that there's something going on that may necessitate our sudden absence. 10 minutes later, and it's now a solid 2 on my care list, and second only to drunk friend about to fall in the river, so I'm watching pretty intently. And all at once, a few thoughts come crashing together to make me do something. So, a bass boat coming upriver against the current would make noise, but I've heard nothing. A boat has its marker lights on the back on a pole, so the light would show the back end of the boat that it's attached to. There's nothing under this light but water. I can see the water under the light, and it's calm. Dead flat calm in a river that is 3/4 of a mile wide at that point. Even if I maybe couldn't hear it, maybe couldn't see it for whatever reason, a boat would create a wake if it's going against the current of the river and all the way across it, and I'm seeing flat glass under its light. Not only no boat wake, but no huge flowing river ripples that were clearly visible on the rest of the surface. No variation in brightness, constant light, color was almost white leaning towards yellow just a bit. And that was it. We were leaving. I tell my friends that it's time to go. We're heading out. Much hullabaloo ensues because drunk people, but we're moving. We walk back to the dock and head for land. Everybody's on land. I'm in the back because that's my job. And alright, everyone's up on the hill towards the parking lot in the car. I look back, and the light is noticeably closer this time. The light is also moving faster than it has been for the last hour or so. So we go and we move. We climb the hill. Everyone is getting in the car except my best friend. We're standing on the top of the flood wall, looking down on the river, the dock and the light. The light is now dead center over the middle of the 10 by 10 platform at the end of the dock. But there's nothing under it but the dock. It's lighting up the area under it, and it's honestly just a light attached to, well, nothing. It's just a light, approximately the size of a light bulb, I guess, probably a bit smaller, lighting up the place that we were just sitting. And now it's moving toward us, crossing above the walkway from the platform toward land and us. And it's moving faster than it was over the water, probably a solid human walking speed now. We all dive into the car at this, and we all just get the heck out of there. My question for all of you guys is, what the heck did we see? What was it doing? Why did it care that we were there at that place that we've been dozens of times before? I'm used to having a probably or even possible explanation for things, but this thing that we saw, I just don't have anything, but I know what I saw, and I don't know what to call it. Several years ago, I had a very quick trip to Denver planned, 23 hours total, to visit a friend before they moved away. I was young, broke, and working a pretty terrible entry-level job, so it was the best that I could do with my one day off. I went straight from work to the airport and got into DIA around 11 p.m. I was bunking on the couch of an old college friend, and they lived 30 to 40 minutes from the airport. Fortunately, the light rail recently had been extended out to the airport, and my friend actually lived near the light rail line. I had taken the light rail often when living in Denver myself, but was not familiar with the newer additions. I barely made it to the train before it set off, grateful to not have to wait around for another half hour at that time of night. It was nearing midnight as the train pulled into a brightly lit Union station. I looked around for my connection, but it was nowhere to be found, not realizing that the connecting line was not there. Fortunately, I was able to flag down security, and they pointed me in the right direction. A few blocks away, there was another brightly lit station, separated by roughly 200 yards. Unlike the stations, there were hardly any lights, just some lights spilling in from either side where the train platform stood. I was only traveling with a backpack, so I was able to move pretty quickly, moving out of Union Station and towards the other platform, hoping that I was going to make my next train. As I got further away from the station, and my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed a large figure standing in the middle of the sidewalk ahead of me. I quickly gauged my surroundings and realized that there were no other paths unless I walked in the road. I decided to keep on the path and do my best to come across with a "I see you and I'm not scared" attitude. As I drew closer, I could make out a tall, muscular man, probably in his 20s or 30s, I would guess, and as I got closer, I made eye contact to let him know that I recognized his presence, and he was already staring right at me, mumbling to himself. As I passed by him, I could hear what he was mumbling. He was not speaking to me, but instead he was speaking about me, and as I walked past him, he then began to follow me. I began to walk fast, and he began to walk faster. All the while, he was saying things like, "Oh, look at that body, she's so fine, I want to feel that body," along with other sexual and crude comments about me, all being muttered to himself. The second station was still another 100 yards or so away, and there was nowhere that I could go in between. I pulled out my cell phone and rang my dad, desperate for him to answer. The call went to voicemail, but I pretended that he picked up. As soon as I began talking, though, the man spoke to me for the first time and said, "Oh girl, I didn't mean you no harm," and the footsteps faded back. I kept up the fake conversation for a moment longer, before looking back and he was nowhere to be found. Like I mentioned previously, I had looked around for places that I could escape and could not find any. I'm confident too with his size that if he had done anything, I would not have stood a chance. I burst into the light of the station, barely made my train, and ultimately missed my stop because I was so shaken up and had to ride the train back around. I finally rested my head on a pillow at my friend's at around 2 a.m. and never to travel alone at night ever again. I recently heard a story here that brought back old memories of my dad's crazy ex-girlfriend. This took place when I was around 8 or 9 years old, so I guess it would have been the year of like 1997. So my parents had gotten divorced several years prior, so me and my little sister, 2 years younger, used to stay with our dad every other weekend. One day, he introduced us to this new girlfriend, Rachel, who was a tall blonde woman that had apparently won some kind of beauty pageant or something. I remember those first months of getting to know Rachel as fun. She seemed like a nice lady, to be honest. I also think my initial impression of her was helped by the fact that she had a rather cuddly grey parrot and a pet raven that could talk, which of course made my younger self quite ecstatic. But after a while, things started to change. I began to notice that she could be a bit odd at times, saying weird things or acting a bit strangely. We started seeing her less frequently when staying with our dad, and then one day he told us that they'd broke up and that we wouldn't be seeing her anymore. He also told us that we shouldn't talk to her or go home with her if she showed up at school. Not long after that, Rachel really started harassing my dad. She would randomly turn up at places we went to visit during weekends, trying to talk with us. She called him non-stop on the phone when we were at home, crying, making threats. It usually didn't stop until he pulled the plug even. Years later, I found out that she had even threatened to kill me and my sister on several occasions, and that Dad got a restraining order in the end. Rachel also keyed my dad's car, broke into his company to trash it, and stole a lot of money that he never got back. She even started writing threatening letters to my mum. My parents have always been good friends ever since the divorce, and it all culminated with a letter from the authorities. A letter accusing my dad of, well, lots of horrible things done to children. I still vividly remember how Mum sat us down in our room, holding the letter, a deep look of concern on her face, asking if Dad had ever done anything inappropriate to us, which of course he never had. It later turned out, though, that it was Rachel who had falsely accused him of everything in that letter, in an attempt to prevent him from seeing us. I remember feeling really angry about this, and upset that she had gone to such lengths. The last memory, though, I have of Rachel was a few weeks before Christmas. We were staying at my dad's place over the weekend. It was a 2-story apartment complex with a large window spanning an entire wall, floor to ceiling, in the living room where we had just sat down to watch TV. Next to the window there was a glass door leading onto a stone patio, bordering a lawn that ended with a tall hedge, and on this particular day, the outdoor lights had been switched off, which means that it was pitch black outside as the intro to Superman started playing. A while into the episode, I suddenly heard a strange, sharp noise coming from the window. It sounded like something was clawing on the glass in an attempt to get in. The sofa that I was sitting on was placed right in front of that window, so I had my back toward it when I slowly turned around to look over my shoulder, heart thumping in my chest, hair standing on end as if I was being watched. But all that came into view was a pitch-black darkness lurking behind my own reflection. By this point, Dad had also heard the sound and gotten up to turn on the patio lights. When the outside suddenly flooded with light, I found myself staring into the face of a smiling blonde woman peering into our living room. Need I tell you that I screamed? Both me and my sister flew up from the couch like it had been scorched with fire and ran behind our dad. When I looked toward the window again, I saw Rachel with both of her hands up against the glass, tightly cupped beside her face as she was trying to look inside. The patio door was right next to her, and I tugged on Dad's shirt and whispered if the door was locked when she reached toward the handle. And that millisecond of doubt flashing across my dad's face, it still haunts me to this day. Rachel truly looked like a madwoman as she furiously jerked on the handle in an attempt to get in, briefly pausing to peer through the glass now and again. I remember thinking Dad looked oddly calm as he ushered us around a corner wall, telling us to stay out of sight as he walked toward the patio door. We begged him not to go outside, thinking that she could have had a knife hidden somewhere or something. He opened up a small crack with the door, firmly holding onto the handle and asking what the heck she was doing in his backyard. She tried to get him to let her in, putting on a big smile, tossing her hair, but Dad obviously wouldn't budge, telling her to leave or he would call the cops. To which she eventually conceded, leaving a bunch of Christmas presents behind. When Rachel was out of sight from the window, Dad went out to make sure that she was gone, picking up what she had left behind on his way back. None of us wanted anything to do with the presents. Something just felt really off about them. And so, in the end, they ended up fully wrapped and in the trash. About 15 or 20 minutes ago, at time of typing this, my wife and I were leaving our friend's house when we saw what we thought was our friend's mother twisting and making unnatural body movements. She was wearing the same clothes we saw her wearing less than an hour before, had the same hair dye and looked almost exactly the same in the face, but something was uncanny. As we approached, the awkward, inhuman movement stopped, and they took a fight stance and froze still with a look on their face, both filled with hate and completely sort of emotionless at the same time. I almost rolled my window down and said something to them, thinking that it was her, right before I realized that something was off. They stared at us, and I said hesitantly to my wife, "That's Wendy, our friend's mum." My wife replied with, "No, that's not Wendy." We were both unsure and couldn't decide if it was her or not. It looked exactly like her, but something was really off. We couldn't put our finger on it. For about 10 or so seconds, we all sat frozen, and it felt as if they were in the car with us. We have tinted windows, but they were looking right at us and didn't break eye contact. It was a very intense, uneasy feeling that my wife and I both experienced. I realize I can drive away, and so I do so. By the time I get to the next stop sign, a half block down the road, I look in the rearview mirror and see that they are now walking towards our car, due south, whereas when we first encountered them, they were heading due north. Seeing them in my rearview mirror heading toward the car, I quickly turned the corner and took off. We called our friend and asked him if he would check on his mother. He misunderstood, and his mother and he went and checked to make sure that none of the cars at the house had been broken into. So we know that it wasn't her out there. This all takes place about 2 or 4 blocks from my friend's house at about 12:30 a.m., and it is one of the most perplexing things that I've ever experienced. This happened when my best friend was 17 and a half and I was 17 in 1996. My best friend Chrissy and I are both smaller females. She's 5'4" and at the time weighed 110 pounds, but was a soccer player, very athletic and strong. I am 5'7", and at the time I weighed about 125 pounds. We are both blue-eyed blondes, and we're often asked if we were sisters or cousins. Now, there's a large reservoir on the outskirts of her town surrounded by a beautiful public park. We figured that we'd be fine to walk around in the park, because lots of people go hiking there after all. I had gotten some really good quality weed, and we were looking forward to finding a peaceful place to smoke some out in nature. I had my pipe ready in my pocket, and we were pretty stoked. But we chose to go out on a Saturday. It was a beautiful sunny day, and there were not many people there either. We parked her car by the reservoir in the mostly vacant lot that had 2 other cars in it. We didn't see anybody when we got there either. We walked around the water for a bit and then chose a trail to go up. It was about 80 degrees out and we were sweating, but we had some water in my small day pack. As we got about a quarter mile or so into the trail, I started having a bit of a weird feeling. I looked at her and quietly asked, "Hey, do you feel like something is off here? Everything's really quiet." Where there were usually crickets chirping and frogs singing, it was absolutely silent. She looked at me and said, "Yeah, I think so." And then we heard some crackling of leaves about 60 feet behind us and a bit to the left. We didn't see anybody at the time, so we continued forward. We were getting pretty nervous and we both heard the crackling again, this time a little bit closer. We still did not see anyone though. Each time we would continue forward, we would hear footsteps a little bit more behind us, and at this point, I thought that we were being stalked. There was a turn off to the left which led to a clearing by a large rock about maybe 12 feet high with a large sturdy rope anchored on it to climb up to the top. It was a part of a steep hillside off the cliff, and the rope to climb it was anchored to the ground as well, so no one could really move it or anything. So I told her, "We need to get up to that rock now and we need high ground." She nodded and went up first with me right behind her. We flew up that rock, clinging to the rope tightly and going as fast as we could. When we reached the top, we turned around to see an older man, probably about 45, with a slighter build, wearing a jacket, jeans, and glasses, coming into the clearing. He was about 20 feet away, and he looked at us with a cold, vacant expression that I'll never forget. I got goosebumps looking at him, and I shouted, "Hi, will you please leave us alone? We're trying to have some privacy here." He made no response, and with a blank expression slowly started walking towards the rope which led to the top of the rock. My friend at this point was really scared and asked, "What do we do?" I saw a large rock about 8 foot and almost square to my right, so I grabbed it. I was surprised at how heavy it was, but my adrenaline was going, so I lifted it pretty easily. I told her, "Look around for the biggest rocks you can find, quickly. Move them next to us. Hold the biggest one. If that guy tries to come up, we throw them at him and hit him as hard as we can. Aim for his head." Fortunately, there was a pile of sort of sizable rocks behind us to the left, like someone had made a ring to hold a fire on the top of the rock there and then move them away or whatever. She brought a few over and held a large one herself. My friend and I stood close to the edge of the rock, holding our makeshift weapons. I looked down to the base of the rock where the guy was considering the rope. He looked up at us again with very cold blue eyes and no expression. Then he reached his hand for the rope. I shouted loudly, "Do not come up here. If you try to come up here, you're going to get really hurt. We're aiming for your head with these rocks, so get away from us." I held the rock close to my chest so that he could see it. My friend was next to me doing the same thing, and we had a pile of more rocks as well. He blinked his eyes and cocked his head a little bit, then released his hand from the rope and silently backed away. He backed to the edge of the clearing, backed through the brush, still watching us and walking backwards. And then we heard his crunching footsteps go back through the woods until we couldn't hear him anymore. We stayed on the rock for about another 20 minutes, maybe a bit more, watching and waiting. There was no other way to access the rock, except for the steep hillside covered with poison oak, so we didn't think that he'd try it, and plus, we'd be able to hear him if he did anyway. After we didn't hear anything for like 20 minutes, we decided to make a break for her car. We threw several rocks down the road, and mine hit the dirt with a particularly satisfying thud. Chrissy went first down while I was watching, just in case he came back. When I was scaling down the rock, she was holding a rock, getting ready to throw it full force if he returned. Fortunately, he didn't. We each grabbed the largest rock that we could carry, put a few smaller ones in our pockets for good measure, and then we headed back to her car on the trail, very carefully and quietly. The crickets were chirping again, so we felt that he had left, but we were still extremely cautious. We did make it back to her car with that incident, and we quickly left. And that was the last time that I've ever